The docking clamp would not let go, and the core meridian was going to die on the ring for a fee of 900 marks, and a habit no clerk on Coburn Drift would ever admit to. Vela's core heard the clamp scream through the deck plates before she understood what it meant. She was in the cargo throat, arguing with a station factor over a stamp, when the whole hull lurched sideways and the loose fittings above her rang like struck bells. The factor grabbed a rail. Vela's did not. She had grown up on ships worse than this one, and her body knew a bad motion before her mind did, and this was a very bad motion, the ship trying to leave, and the ring refusing to release it, the two of them tearing at each other with the ship losing. "Clamp 4 is fouled," someone shouted down the corridor. Pell the loader, his voice climbing. "It's fouled, it won't blow, we're going to fold the strut." "Then someone tell the pilot to stop pulling," the factor snapped, as if that were an answer. Velas was already moving. She went up the ladder 2 rungs at a time, past the mess with its cold kettle, past the frost on the porthole where the recyclers had given up months ago, and onto the flight deck, where a single human sat in the left seat and did nothing that looked like panic. That was the first thing she would remember about him later, when everything else had turned strange. In a moment when 4 of her people were screaming into their collars, and a station arm was bending her only asset toward scrap, the human she had hired that morning for less than the price of the fuel was sitting perfectly still, one hand flat on the throttle rail, the other resting on his knee, watching the strut gauge the way a man watches a pot he already knows is going to boil. "Cut the burn," Vela said. Cut it, the clamp's fouled." "I know," the human said. He did not cut the burn. He eased it. There was a difference, and Velas, who had flown freight since she was old enough to reach the pedals with a cushion behind her, felt the difference in her teeth. He did not yank the thrust off, which would have let the strut snap back and whip the fouled clamp through the hull. He bled it down, a hair at a time, until the ship stopped fighting the ring and simply leaned against it, patient, heavy, waiting. The screaming in the deck plates dropped to a groan, then to nothing. "Clamp 4, the human said, without raising his voice, into the ship's channel. "It's not fouled. It's frozen. The heater ring under it died and the water in the collar iced. Somebody put a hot iron on it for 90 seconds and it'll drop." A pause on the line. Then Tava's Dower, her engineer, older than her father would have been, said in his slow gravel, "How do you know the heater ring's dead?" "Because the 4 other clamps let go and this one didn't," the human said, "and cold is the only thing they all have in common today." Vela stood in the hatchway and watched the back of his head. He had not looked at her once. He was watching the strut gauge come off its red line, degree by degree, and only when it settled did he take his hand off the throttle rail and fold both hands in his lap like a man on a bench waiting for a bus that was not in a hurry. Down in the guts of the ship, she heard Dower swear, and then she heard the distant thump of a heat iron being slapped against a frozen collar. And then, 90 seconds later, almost to the tick, Clamp 4 let go with a bang that ran the length of the ship, and the core meridian slid free of Coburn Drift and out into the dark, whole and unimpounded, and hers for one more run. Nobody had died. That was the second thing she would remember. Nobody had died, and the human had not once raised his voice. She should have felt relief. What she felt, standing behind him with her heart still going like a loose piston, was something closer to unease, the specific unease of a person who has just watched someone do easily a thing she had believed could not be done at all. "You're the pilot from the hall," she said. "Coburn." "Yes. I hired you this morning." "You did? For 900 marks in the mess bunk." "Yes." She waited for him to say something a man might say, that she'd gotten a bargain, that a real pilot would have cost her 10 times that she owed him already. That was how the hall worked. Pilots were mouths first and hands second. They talked their price up before they'd so much as sat in the seat. This one had talked her price down. She had offered 1,000 in the mess bunk, and he had said 900 was fine. He didn't need the extra 100. and she had been too surprised to argue. He said none of the things a man might say. He reached down to the deck beside his seat, picked up a battered metal cup with a dent in the rim, and drank cold tea out of it, and watched the stars stop smearing as the ship found its line. Deadliest was 26 years old, which among the Celani was young to be anything and far too young to be the head of a trade house, even a trade house as small and as sinking as House Corps. Her father had run the Meridian for 40 years and left it to her along with a ledger written mostly in red and a reputation for honesty that no bank had ever once accepted as collateral. She had a crew of 4, a hull older than any of them, and a contract in her coat that would either clear the whole debt in one run or leave the Meridian a cold shell in a corridor no one flew anymore. She had hired a human because no Celani pilot on the drift would take the contract, and the humans in the hall came cheap because humans always came cheap now because of the war. She had not thought much beyond that. A body in the seat, a licensed stick. She had looked at the quiet one in the corner with the dented cup and the long stillness, and she had thought, that one won't give me trouble, and she had been right, though not in any way she yet understood. We make the Thren reach in 9 days, she told him. You've seen the routing. I've seen it. You didn't ask about it. Coburn turned his head then, for the first time, and looked at her. He had a plain face, young under the tiredness, with a scar that ran pale through one eyebrow and old weather in the eyes that did not match the rest of him. He looked at her the way she imagined a stone might look at weather, without complaint, without much interest, taking it as it came. You already know it's a bad route, he said. Me asking questions about it won't make it a better one. You'll fly it because the money's on the far side. That's your business. Getting you across is mine. Then he turned back to the stars, and that was the longest string of words Deadliest would hear out of him for 6 days. The Thren Reach was a graveyard, and everyone who flew freight knew it, which was exactly why nobody flew freight through it. 300 years ago it had been a shipping lane like any other, a broad clean corridor between 2 arms of settled space, busy with grain haulers and ore barges, and the small bright traffic of 100 worlds. Then the long burn had come through it. The war that the old ones still could not speak of without lowering their voices had used the Reach as a killing floor, because it was a choke point, because whoever held it held the road between the inner worlds and the outer ones, and the thing the war was fought against did not care about roads except as places to feed. When the war moved on, it left the Reach full of the dead. Not bodies, there were few enough of those, but machines, hulks. The corpses of warships the size of cities, drifting cold in the long dark, and worse than the hulks, the seed of the enemy itself, the dormant munitions and the sleeping hunters that the threshers had sown through the corridor like a farmer sowing salt, so that even in defeat the ground they lost would stay poisoned for 100 lifetimes. The Reach did not kill you with fire. It killed you with attention. That was the thing every child on the trade lanes learned before they learned to read a star chart. The dead machines in the Reach were not truly dead. They were asleep, and they woke to noise, to the shout of an active drive, the pulse of a scanning array, the bright chatter of a ship announcing itself, the way ships were built to announce themselves. Go loud in the Reach, and something old and patient would open one eye, and then another, and then you were part of the graveyard too. Deadliest knew all of this. So did her crew. They had argued about it for 2 nights running before she signed the contract, in the mess, over the cold kettle, and the argument had gone in circles the way arguments do when everyone is right and it changes nothing. There's a clean route, she had told them, spreading the chart across the mess table with the heel of her hand. Cargo's medical, seed stock, gene libraries, a spine clinic's whole cold store bound for the outer Kel worlds. They lost their crops to the wither and their doctors to the border tax, and if the seed in the stores don't reach them by the turn, they lose the season, and a lot of them lose more than that. The inner shippers won't run it because the border tax on the long way round eats the whole fee. So the Kell Trust is paying a war route premium to anyone with the nerve to cut through the reach. It clears our debt, all of it, in one run. And if we wake something, Dower had said. We won't, we run cold. We drift the dead zones on inertia the way the old smugglers did. You know the trick, you taught me the trick. I taught you the trick on a chart, the old engineer had said. The chart's 300 years old, the dead move, they drift. The corridor that was clear when your grandfather's grandfather ran, it is not the corridor now. Some of what's asleep in there has never been mapped because nobody who found it lived to file a chart. He had looked at her with the particular tenderness of a man who has already decided to follow you into a bad place and only wants you to know the cost first. I lost a brother in that war, girl, on a line not far from that reach. I know what the threshers were. I would not send my worst enemy ship through their leavings for all the marks in the Kell Trust. Then don't come, Valus had said, and immediately hated the shape of the words in her mouth. Don't be a fool, Dower had said gently, forgiving her before she'd finished being cruel. Of course I'm coming. Who'd fish you out? So they had signed and loaded the cold stores at Coburn Drift and hired a pilot in the hall because you did not fly the Reach on a single stick and Valus could not fly it and keep the house running from the same chair. And now the human sat in the left seat with his dented cup, and the Meridian ran for the Reach at a quarter burn to save fuel, and the crew watched the new man the way a crew always watches a new man, sidelong testing. He gave them nothing to test. He flew clean and slept little and ate less, and when he did eat he ate standing in the corner of the mess with his back to the bulkhead, facing the door, a habit so ingrained that Valus doubted he knew he did it. He fixed things without being asked. On the second day, the port recycler that had been dead since spring came back to life without ceremony, and when Pell asked who'd fixed it, nobody had, except that the human had been down there for an hour with a light and the battered multi-tool he carried in his hip pocket. And after that the mess had frost on only one porthole instead of two. Pell, who was 19 and afraid of nothing because he had not yet lived long enough to learn what to be afraid of, decided the human was a wonder and attached himself accordingly. Where'd you learn ships? Pell asked him, third day in the mess, while Coburn stood in his corner and ate a bowl of the gray protein nin cooked into 100 shapes that all tasted the same. Around, Coburn said. You fly military, you got the look. My cousin flew a customs cutter for a season, and he had the look, the sitting still look, like the seat owes you money. I flew freight, Coburn said, which was not an answer, and Pell, who was 19, did not notice it wasn't. But Tava's Dower noticed. The old engineer said nothing, but Valus saw him watching the human across the mess, watching the way Coburn stood, the way he'd chosen the corner, the way his eyes went to the door every time the hatch cycled, and she saw something move behind the old man's face that she could not name and did not ask about, because House Corps had 11 days to the Kell worlds and a debt to clear and no time for the private weather of an old man's memory. She should have asked. She would think that later. She should have asked Dower what he saw. But there is no should have that survives contact with the Reach, and by the time she thought to ask, the question had answered itself, and the answer was flying her ship. They crossed into the Reach on the 9th day at the ship's 4th bell, running dark. Valus gave the order herself, standing behind the 2 flight seats with her hands on the backs of both. Cold ship, she said, and Dower killed the main array, and the running lights and the transponder and the loud clean voice of the drive dropped to a whisper as Coburn brought them down to the drift burn, just enough thrust to steer, no more, the ship going silent and small and dark the way a rabbit goes small under the shadow of a hawk. The Reach opened ahead of them on the passive scopes, and it was worse than the chart. The chart showed hulks as neat cold dots with 3-century-old positions. The scopes showed the truth. The dead had drifted, as Dower had said they would. The corridor Valus's grandfather's grandfather had run was gone, and in its place was a slow river of iron, warships broken across 100 kilometers, A command hull the length of a mountain range, turning end over end so slowly that a whole human lifetime would not see it complete one revolution. And among the great dead things, the small ones, the seeds, the sleepers, cold points that gave off nothing, that the scopes could barely find, that you knew were there only by the shape of the nothing around them. Mother of the Deep, Pell said, very quietly, at his loader's station where he had no business being except that no one had the heart to send him away. It's a whole navy. It was, Dower said, both navies, ours and theirs, all in one grave. He did not look up from his board. Keep your voice down, boy. I know it can't hear you through the hull. Keep it down anyway. Coburn said nothing. His hands moved on the controls, small and constant, threading the meridian into the river of the dead, and Valus watched him do it and understood slowly that he was not reading the chart. He had it up on the glass the same as everyone, but his eyes were not on it. His eyes were on the passive scope, on the dark shapes and the shapes of dark, and he was steering by them, by the things themselves and not by any 3-century-old promise of where they ought to be. And he was doing it without hurry and without fear and without, as far as she could tell, any doubt at all. "You've flown a graveyard before," she said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," Coburn said. "This one." He was quiet for a moment. On the scope, a broken cruiser slid past off the starboard bow, close enough that its snapped ribs showed as individual teeth of shadow against the deeper dark, and he adjusted, a breath of thrust, and the teeth slid away. "One like it," he said, and that was all, and Valus let it be all, because just then the passive scope caught something ahead that was not dead, that was moving with intent. 3 fast cold sparks cutting across the river of iron on an intercept line, and Dower said the word that ended every easy thing. "Contacts," the old engineer said. 3 live drives. They're not drifting, Valus, they're hunting, and they're coming for us." The Scarrow were scavengers, and scavengers, Jace Coburn had learned a long time ago, were the second most dangerous thing in any graveyard. The first was the graveyard itself. He watched the 3 cold sparks resolve on the passive scope and did not touch the throttle. Beside him, the engineer's hands had gone still on the board, and behind him he could feel the young heir's grip tighten on the seatback, and somewhere aft the boy had stopped breathing loudly enough that Coburn could hear him stop. The whole ship had gone taut around him, the way a ship does when its people understand at last that the danger is real. He knew that tautness. He had lived inside it for 4 years, on a line that no longer existed, and he had learned the one thing about it that mattered, which was that the tautness itself would kill you faster than the enemy if you let it into your hands. "Talk to me about them," he said quietly to the old engineer. Not an order. He was not in the business of orders anymore, just a man asking a man who knew. "Scarrow," Dower said, "reavers. Small hulls, fast, converted racers, most of them. They live off the reach. They don't go deep, they can't, they're too loud, they'd wake the sleepers. They work the edge. They wait for fools like us to come through, and they take what they can before the deep takes them." The old engineer's voice was steady, which Coburn respected. Fear in the voice was fine. It was fear in the hands that killed you. "They'll have seen our drift burn. Cold as we're running, a live drive still shines to a hull that's looking for it. They know we're carrying, or we wouldn't be here." "How many usually?" "3's a pack. There'll be a 4th somewhere hanging back that we can't see, the mother. They don't commit the pack without the mother watching." Coburn nodded slowly, and did the arithmetic he had done 1,000 times in a life he had walked away from. 3 fast hulls, a 4th in reserve. 1 old freighter, unarmed but for a mining laser Dower had bolted to the spine that was good for cracking asteroids and nothing that shot back. No help within 9 days. A corridor full of things that woke to noise. And the reavers, who knew the corridor, who lived on its edge, who would push the meridian exactly as hard as they dared and not 1 degree harder, because they, too, were afraid of what slept in the deep. That last part was the whole game. He turned it over and found the shape of it and set his hands back on the controls. They won't chase us into the deep, he said. No, Dower agreed. They won't. But we can't go into the deep either, boy. The deep's what we've been threading around the edge of. Go in there loud enough to shake 3 reavers and you'll wake something that eats all 4 of us. I'm not going to go loud, Coburn said. He brought the Meridian's nose over. A long, slow swing, away from the clean edge of the corridor where the reavers hunted and down toward the river of iron, toward the great turning command hull and the broken cruisers and the cold quiet of the true graveyard. And he heard the air behind him draw breath to say something, and he spoke before she could, because he needed her not to argue with him for the next 4 minutes. Captain, he said, it was the first time he'd used the word. I need the ship dark. All the way dark. Not drift burn, dark. I'm going to cut the drive and we're going to go into the deep on the throw we've already got, cold, no thrust, no lights, no heat we can shed, nothing they can see and nothing the sleepers can hear. We're going to become one more dead thing in a field of dead things. Can your engineer do that? Can he bleed the reactor down to a candle and hold it there? A silence. He did not look back at her. He had learned not to look at people when he asked them for the hard thing. The looking made it about him, and it was never about him. Dower, the air said. I can candle her, the old engineer said. I can drop her to housekeeping and dark the whole spine. But once she's cold, boy, she's cold. We won't get the reactor back up to burn in under 20 minutes. If we're wrong about the reavers not following, we'll be a dead ship with 3 live ones alongside and no way to run. We won't be wrong, Coburn said. You can't know that. I know reavers, Coburn said, and left it there, because the rest of the sentence was a place he did not go anymore, and because it was true. He knew reavers. He knew the exact arithmetic of their courage. He had spent 4 years being the thing that scavengers picked over the leavings of, and he had learned what they would and would not do the way a man learns the moods of a dog that has bitten him. Do it, Valus Core said. Coburn cut the drive. The Meridian went dark from the spine out. The reactor's low hum, so constant that the ear stopped hearing it, dropped away into a silence so total that the ship seemed to hold its breath. The lights died. The air handlers spun down. The frost on the one live porthole began, very slowly, to spread to its neighbor as the last of the heat started its long leak into the dark. And the ship, with the drive dead, kept moving, because that was the one thing they could not take from it. The throw it already had, the momentum of a loaded freighter, carrying them silent and cold down off the clean edge and into the river of iron at the speed of a thrown stone, unpowered, undirected, one more piece of debris drifting where the current took it. On the passive scope, the passives took almost no power, and Dower had left them the passives. The 3 reaver sparks slowed. Coburn watched them slow. He watched them lose the Meridian's live drive because there was no live drive anymore, and he watched them do the thing he had known they would do, the thing that reavers always did, which was to hesitate at the edge of the deep and weigh the take against the graveyard. A loaded freighter was a rich take, but a loaded freighter that had just gone dark and dived into the field of sleeping death was a take that would cost them the thing they valued most, which was themselves. They've stopped, Pell breathed from his station. They've stopped. Quiet, boy. They're going to lose us in the hulks, Pell said, wonder cracking his whisper. They can't follow us in cold, they'll wake the... Quiet, Coburn said, not unkindly, and the boy went quiet, and they drifted, all of them, cold and dark and silent, into the field of the dead, while 3 reavers sat at the edge of the deep and watched the rich fat freighter turn into just another piece of the graveyard they were afraid of. For 11 minutes nobody spoke. The Meridian fell through the river of iron on the throw it had, and Coburn flew it with nothing, with the reaction jets Dower could feed a cold trickle to, a cough of gas here and there to keep them off the broken cruisers, and the rest of it he flew with his eyes, reading the shapes of the dark, sliding the dead freighter through a field of dead warships close enough that the boy at the loader's station made small sounds with each pass and could not seem to help it. Coburn did not mind the sounds. Fear that came out of a boy in small sounds was fear that was not getting into anyone's hands. It was the silent ones you watched. At the 11th minute, the 3 Reaver sparks turned away. They peeled off the edge of the deep, one and then the second and then the third, and went back to their hunting ground where the drives ran loud and the sleepers slept far away. And the mother that Dower had promised was out there somewhere, turned with them and was gone. And the passive scope showed nothing alive in the whole river of iron but one cold dead freighter falling silent through the ranks of the dead. Vaylis Corps let out a breath that Coburn suspected she had been holding for most of 11 minutes. "They're gone," she said. "There, you were right, they wouldn't follow." "They never do," Coburn said. He gave it another 4 minutes because Reavers sometimes faked the turn and doubled back to catch you the moment you lit your drive in relief. And then he gave it 2 more because he was patient and there was no reason not to be. And only when the passive scope had been clean for 6 full minutes did he say, quietly, "All right, Dower, bring her up. Slow, housekeeping first, then thrust. No arrays, no lights we don't need. We're not out of the deep, we've just come further into it. And the deep's the part I actually worry about." Behind him, he heard the young heir sit down, finally, in the jump seat, as though her legs had decided the matter without her. And he heard the old engineer, bringing the reactor up off its candle with the slow care of a man waking a sleeping animal, say something under his breath that Coburn was not meant to hear, but heard anyway, because the flight deck was small, and old habits do not switch off. "Where?" Tavas Dower murmured to his board to himself, to the ghost of a brother he had lost on a line not far from here. "Did a freight pilot learn to fly a graveyard cold?" Coburn set his hands back in his lap and picked up the dented cup and found the tea in it long gone to ice. And he did not answer the old man, because the old man had not asked him, and because the answer was 300 kilometers and 30 years and 1 dead line away. And he had spent every day since then learning not to say it out loud. They ran the deep for 2 more days, and Coburn did not sleep, or slept the way he had taught himself to sleep in the war, which was in 10-minute pieces in the flight seat, with one part of his mind left standing watch like a lamp left burning in an empty house. Vaylis watched him do it, and did not understand it and could not look away from it. She had run freight her whole life and she had never seen anyone fly the way the human flew. It was not that he was fast. He was, if anything, slow, deliberate, unhurried to the point that it made her want to scream in the first hour and made her want to weep with relief by the second day. It was that he did not fight the ship, or the dark, or the dead. He went with them. He read the river of iron the way Dower read a reactor, by feel, by 1,000 small tells that Vaylis could half see once he'd shown her they were there, and could never have found on her own. He knew which hulks were truly dead and which were only mostly dead. He knew, without any array to tell him, when they were passing near one of the cold seeds, the sleepers, because the seeds gave off a particular kind of nothing, a hole in the passive scope's grain, and he steered wide of those holes with a care he gave nothing else. A care that was almost tenderness, the way a man steps wide around a thing he has seen kill people he loved. On the first night in the deep, one of the seeds nearly woke, and the crew learned in their bodies what the man had been telling them in words. It began as a change in the grain of the passive scope, one of the cold holes, a sleeper the chart had never marked, brightening by a hair as the meridian drifted too near it on a line the 300-year map had sworn was clean. Dower saw it first and made a sound in his throat. Pell saw it second and started at his station to reach for the drive board, the animal reflex, the want to burn away from the waking thing. And Jace Coburn's hand closed over the boy's wrist before it reached the board, without hurry, without even looking, the way a man catches a cup before it falls. "No," Jace said, quiet, flat. "You burn now, it finishes waking and it's between us and the only way out. Hands off the board, son. We don't run, we starve it." "Starve it?" Pell's voice cracked. "It's waking up, it's waking to us moving," Jace said. "So we stop moving, Dower cut the reaction jets, all of them, not a cough. We drift dead on the throw we've got and we let it pass under us cold and it goes back to sleep because there's nothing to wake for. It can't see a thing that isn't moving. It can only feel a thing that thrashes, so we don't thrash. He took his hand off Pell's wrist. Everybody breathe slow. It can't hear you. Breathe slow anyway. Slow is alive. And they drifted, dead and silent, over the brightening hole in the dark, while a thing the chart had never known was there came within 100 meters of the hull and hung there, half-woken, feeling the water for the movement that had troubled its long sleep, and found nothing, because there was nothing, because a freight pilot who had learned the trick at a gate had made a loaded freighter into one more piece of the debris that drifted over it every year. For 4 minutes the hole in the scope stayed bright. Valus did not breathe. Then, by degrees, the way a fire that finds no fuel gutters back down to a coal, the sea dimmed and cooled and went back into the dark, and was a cold hole again, and the meridian drifted on past it into the deep hole. Pell sat shaking at his station. Jace reached over after a moment and put the boy's own hand back on the drive board, gently, a permission and a lesson at once. "There," he said. "Now you've done the hardest thing there is. You wanted to run and you sat still instead with a waking God 100 meters off the hull because sitting still was right. Remember how that felt. That's the whole job. That's the only thing I know that the war ever taught anybody worth keeping." He turned back to his controls. "You'll be a fine hand, boy. You've got the one thing that can't be taught, which is that you were scared to death just now and you did the slow thing anyway. Keep doing that and you'll grow old. Most people never learn it. You learned it your first night in the deep." Pell did not answer, but he sat straighter after that, and he watched the human's hands the way an apprentice watches a master, and he never once reached for the board again without being told. On the second day in the deep, she brought him a fresh cup of tea, hot, and took the iced one out of his hand, and he looked at the hot cup, and then at her with something that was not quite surprise, but was in the same family as surprise, the look of a man being handed a kindness he had stopped expecting the universe to contain. "Thank you," he said. "You haven't slept." "I've slept." "You've closed your eyes in the seat for 10 minutes at a time." "That's not sleeping. It's the kind that works in here." He wrapped both hands around the hot cup and did not drink from it yet, just held it, and Valus saw the old weather in his eyes ease a fraction in the heat of it, and thought, with a small private jolt, that she had spent 3 days thinking of the human as a tool she had rented and was only now, over a cup of tea, beginning to think of him as a man. "You said you flew a graveyard like this before," she said, sitting in the empty right seat, careful, the way you sit near a wild thing you don't want to spook. "Not this one. One like it." "I did." "Where?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. On the passive scope, the river of iron turned its slow cold wheel around them, and far off, the great command hull the length of a mountain range showed its broken flank to the starlight, and Coburn looked at it, at that particular hulk, with an expression she could not read. "A long way from here," he said at last, "and a long time ago. I was young, younger than your boy." He turned the hot cup in his hands. "It doesn't make for good talk, Captain. There's a reason the old ones lower their voices about the burn. It's not superstition. It's just that there's nothing to say about it that helps anyone and a lot to say that doesn't, and after a while a man figures out that the kindest thing he can do with it is keep it behind his teeth." Valus went very still. "The burn," she said. "The long burn." "I said too much," Coburn said mildly, and drank his tea, and that was the end of it. Except that it was not the end of it, because Tava's Dower had come up the ladder with a spanner in his hand to check the array cabling, and had stopped in the hatchway at the word burn, and was standing there now, an old Celani engineer with a dead brother and 30 years of lowered voices, looking at the young human in the flight seat as though the deck had opened under him. "You were in the burn," Dower said. It came out of him rough, half a whisper. "Boy, you were in the long burn." Coburn looked at him. For a moment something passed between the two of them, the old engineer and the young pilot, that Vela stood entirely outside of. A recognition in a language she did not speak, the language of people who have stood on the wrong side of the same fire. "I flew freight," Coburn said, gently, giving the old man the door out of it, the polite lie, the thing that let everyone go back to their stations and pretend. But Tava's dower did not take the door. He came the rest of the way onto the flight deck, and he set the spanner down on the console with the care of a man setting down something in a temple, and he looked at the human's forearm, where the sleeve had ridden up when Coburn reached for the T, at the pale old mark burned into the skin there, a mark Velas had seen 100 times over 3 days and taken for a scar, an old work burn, the kind every mechanic carried. It was not a work burn. She saw that now in the way the old man was looking at it. It was a shape. A deliberate shape, a brand, an insignia burned once into living skin by someone who had meant it to stay. A narrow line, and above the line a single point of flame, and around the flame a ring, worn now and pale with 30 years but unmistakable once you knew to look, and Tava's dower knew to look, and his old hands had started, very slightly, to shake. "That's the Cindergaard mark," the old engineer said. Coburn pulled his sleeve down. "Dower," he said quietly. "That's the Cindergaard mark," Dower said again, louder, and now there was something breaking in his voice, some 30-year-old thing coming up through the floor of him. "You wear the Cindergaard mark. Boy, do you know what, there were 9 of them. 9 in the whole galaxy that came off the Ashfall Line alive. 9 out of 40,000. I have lit a candle for them every year of my life. My brother died so that line could hold, and I have lit a candle for the 9 every year for 30 years, and you are sitting in my captain's flight seat drinking her tea for 900 marks and the mess bunk." "Dower," Coburn said, and there was no force in it, only a terrible gentleness. "You're frightening the captain." Velas Corps had grown up on the story of the Ashfall Line, the way every child of the trade lanes had grown up on it, which was to say she had grown up on it the way she'd grown up on the shape of her own bones, so deep in her she had never once thought of it as a story at all. The long burn was the war the galaxy did not name lightly. Before her grandmother's time, the threshers had come out of the dark between the arms, not a people, not a fleet, but a hunger with engines, a self-making swarm that ate worlds down to slag and grew from the eating, that did not negotiate because it did not want, that spread along the trade roads faster than the roads could be closed. Whole species had gone into that hunger and not come out. The war against it had lasted a generation and had been lost, region by region, world by world, until the only thing left between the swarm and the settled inner worlds, the Selani homeworlds, the Kel worlds, 100 others, every star Velas had ever called by name, was one chokepoint, one narrow road, one line. The Ashfall Line, held at the Cinder Gate, at the mouth of what men would later call the Thren Reach. They had known, the ones who held it, that they were not going to be relieved. That was the part of the story that had made Velas cry as a girl and made her go quiet as a woman. There was no fleet coming. The inner worlds needed every hour the line could buy to evacuate the outer colonies behind it, to move 11 billion people back through the road before the swarm broke through. And the only way to buy those hours was for the line to stand at the gate and not break. And the only way for a line of flesh and steel to not break against a hunger with engines was for the people on it to burn where they stood. 40,000 had held the Ashfall Line. Humans, mostly, humanity had come late to the galaxy and had almost nothing else to offer it but this, a stubbornness that the older species had lost or never had, a refusal to leave a road undefended just because defending it was death. 40,000 held the Cinder Gate for 19 days while 11 billion strangers fled behind them, and on the 19th day the line held, and the swarm broke against it and could not get through. And when the inner world's hastily built second fleet finally arrived at the gate to take up the defense, they found the swarm shattered and drifting, and the Ashfall Line shattered and drifting with it. 40,000 gone into the fire, and 9 still alive in the wreck of it. Pulled cold and half-dead from the hulks, the 9 that every world behind the gate had lit a candle for every year since, because they were what standing had cost, and because they were proof that it could be paid. The Cinder Guard. Velis had a candle holder for them on the Meridian's mess shelf. Her father had lit it every year. She had lit it herself this last turn alone, 3 days after she buried him, not knowing what else to do with her hands. And one of the 9 was sitting in her flight seat, drinking her tea for 900 marks. She looked at him now, really looked, the way you look at a thing when the frame around it has just changed, and she saw what she had been too busy to see for 3 days. The stillness that she had taken for dullness, the way he ate facing the door, the way he had gone into the deep without fear because he had already been to the bottom of a worse deep and come back, one of 9, the old weather in a young man's eyes. She had hired the Ashfall Line for 900 marks and a mess bunk, and it had said yes, and had talked her down 100 because she understood this all at once, and it took the breath out of her, because he did not want the 100 or the honor or the candles or any of it. He wanted a seat and a cup, and to be left alone to do a plain thing plainly. He had spent 30 years learning to be no one, and she had, without knowing it, given him exactly what he wanted, which was a captain who thought he was no one too. "You should have told me," she said. It came out smaller than she meant it. "Why?" Coburn said, not unkind, a real question. "Because I'd have," she stopped, "because I'd have what? Treated you differently, paid you more, put you at the head of the table. Asked you to tell the story over and over the way everyone always must, until the telling wore the last of the man off the legend. She heard the shape of it and understood, finally, why he flew freight, why he took the quiet corner, why he had been glad 3 days ago to be hired by someone who saw a body in a seat. Because I'd have made it about you," she said instead. "And you didn't want that." "No," Coburn said. "I didn't." He looked at her, and for the first time since Corbin Drift there was something like warmth in the old weather eyes, a plain human gratitude. "Thank you, Captain. For not," he gestured, a small motion of the dented cup, at the whole apparatus of legend and candle and lowered voice. "For letting me fly your ship." Tava's dower was still standing by the console, and the old engineer had aged 10 years in 5 minutes, and now he did the thing that Velis would remember longest out of that whole strange voyage. He did not salute. He did not weep, though he was close to it. He picked his spanner back up off the console, and he turned it in his old hands, and he said in his slow gravel, roughened now, "My brother was on the Ashfall Line, 3rd Regiment, Newham Dower. He'd have been under your command likely if you flew screen for 3rd. He swallowed. "I've spent 30 years wanting to ask one of the 9 a question, just one. I never thought I'd get to." Coburn set down the cup. "Ask it," he said. "Was it quick?" Dower said. "For the ones who, I know it wasn't quick for most. I've read what there is to read. I just need to know from someone who was there whether it was quick for any of them, whether it could have been quick for him." The flight deck was very quiet. On the passive scope, the river of iron turned. Velis stood between the two of them, the old engineer and the young survivor, and felt that she should leave and could not make her legs do it. "I didn't know your brother," Coburn said. "There were 40,000 of us and I knew 40, but I'll tell you the true thing because you asked me for the true thing and you've earned it." He met the old man's eyes. "Some of it was quick, not most, but some. And the ones it was quick for Dower, I promise you this, and I don't promise things, the ones it was quick for went out doing the one thing they decided to do, which was to stand on that road so that the people behind them could run. Whatever else it was never wasted. Not one of them died for nothing. Every hour we held, 100,000 people got further down the road. Your brother's hour bought 100,000. That's not nothing. That's the opposite of nothing. That's the biggest thing a life can be spent on, and he spent his on it on purpose." He paused. If he was on 3rd at the gate, he was a hard man in a hard place doing the hardest thing there is, and wherever he is, He is not ashamed of how he spent it. I'd stake the last of my own life on that. Tava's dour turned his face to the console and did not speak for a while, and no one made him, and when he had control of himself again he nodded once and picked up his spanner, and went back down the ladder to check the array cabling, because that was the job, and the job was a mercy, and old men and young ones both know it. Velas Kaur sat in the right seat and looked at the man she had hired. "I'm not going to make it about you," she said. "I meant that. You'll fly my ship and I'll pay you your 900 and the mess bunk, and I'll call you Coburn, and nobody at the Kell end will ever hear a word from me. But I'm going to say one thing once and then I'll leave it." She waited until he looked at her. "Thank you, not for the ship. For the road. My whole family's alive because 40,000 of you stood at a gate. I've lit a candle for you every year of my life, and I never once thought I'd get to say it to your face. So, thank you." Coburn looked at her for a long moment, and something in him, some door she had not known was shut, opened a hand's width. "You're welcome," he said, which was, she would realize later, the only time in the whole voyage she heard him accept anything at all. Then the passive scope chimed, one soft cold tone, and everything easy was over again, because out in the deep, from the belly of the great turning command hull the length of a mountain range, something had begun, very faintly, to call for help. It was a beacon, and it was old, and it was not Thresher, and that made it worse. Dower came back up the ladder at the chime and put it on the flight deck speaker, and they listened to it together in the cold half-dark. A repeating pulse, weak, riding a carrier so degraded it was barely there, an automated distress call in a format Velas did not know and Dower did, because Dower was old. "That's a Celani hull code," the engineer said slowly. "That's Mother of the Deep, that's a civilian squawk, that's a passenger squawk. Velas, that's a lifeboat beacon." "From the war," Velas said, 300 years. "No," Coburn had leaned forward in the flight seat, and all the stillness had gone out of him and been replaced by something sharper, more awake, a focus Velas had not seen in him even during the reavers. "No. That's not a 300-year carrier. Look at the drift on it. That carrier's been degrading for months, not centuries. Weeks, maybe. That beacon's fresh." He looked at the scope, at the great turning command hull, at the faint pulse coming out of the deep dark near its shattered flank. "Somebody's alive out there, somebody civilian, and they're squawking from inside the single worst place in this entire graveyard to be alive in." "Inside the command hull," Dower said. "Near it, maybe in its shadow, maybe tucked up against it." Coburn's jaw worked. "That thing," he nodded at the mountain range hulk, and Velas heard, for the first time, a note in his voice that was not calm, a note that she would only later understand was the closest thing to fear the man had left in him. "That's not a warship. That's a Thresher command mass. That's the thing the Ashfall Line was holding the gate against. When they broke the swarm, the command masses went dormant, but dormant isn't dead. They wake to noise, and they wake angry, and they are the one thing in this reach that, if it wakes all the way up, doesn't just eat the ship that woke it. It starts making more of itself out of the ship that woke it. That's what they do. That's what they were built to do. That's why the whole reach is a graveyard and not a salvage yard. Because nobody's ever been able to strip these hulls. Because the moment you go loud next to a dormant command mass, it wakes, and it turns your salvage crew into more command mass." The beacon pulsed, weak, patient. A civilian lifeboat, calling into the dark, tucked up against the flank of the deadliest sleeping thing in the corridor, and not knowing, because how could a lifeboat's automatics know, that every pulse it sent was a pebble tossed at a sleeping mountain? Velas Kaur looked at the scope and felt the whole shape of her voyage change under her, the way the meridian had changed under her at Corvin Drift, a bad motion her body knew before her mind did. "We have a schedule," she heard herself say, and hated herself for saying it, and said it anyway because someone had to be the captain and count the cost out loud. "We have cold stores for 11 billion for the Kell worlds. seed and gene libraries, and a spine clinic's whole cold store. If we don't make the turn, the Kell lose the season. People die at the Kell end if we're late. Real people. A lot of them. And that beacon is one lifeboat, maybe empty, maybe automatic, squawking next to a thing that will turn my ship into more of itself if we go anywhere near it loud enough to dock. Yes, Coburn said, that's all true. So tell me I'm right to fly past it. He looked at her, and Valus understood in the look that he was not going to give her that. That whatever else the man was, he was one of 9 who had stood on a road so that strangers could run. And there was no version of him that flew past a lifeboat. And there was also no version of him that would take the choice out of her hands, because it was her ship and her house and her decision. And he had spent 30 years learning exactly how much a person's own decisions were worth, and would not steal one from her even to save her the weight of it. I won't tell you that, he said. I'll tell you what's true, and then you'll decide, and then I'll fly whatever you decide, all the way in or all the way past, and I won't say another word about it either way. He set the dented cup down on the console. What's true is this. There are people on that boat, or there were people, and the automatics are still trying to save them. And going in to get them is the most dangerous thing I've done since the day I came off the line. And I've done a lot of dangerous things, Captain, and I'm still here, which means I'm either lucky or careful, and I promise you it isn't luck. He held her eyes. It can be done. Cold, silent, slow, the way we've been running. If it can be done at all, it can be done that way. And I know that way better than anyone alive, because I'm one of the ones who learned it the hard way and lived. But it can also kill all of us and everyone on that boat and lose the Kell their season on top of it. Both of those are true at the same time. That's the deep. It doesn't do clean choices. Valus Core sat in the cold half-dark, 26 years old, head of a sinking house, with a debt in one hand and a lifeboat in the other and 11 billion strangers at the far end of the road. And she made the decision her father would have made, and hated it, and knew it was right. Take us in, she said, cold and slow. We go get whoever's on that boat, and then we run like the deep itself is on our heels for the Kell worlds, and we make that turn if I have to burn the hull to do it. She looked at him. Can you get us in and out? I can get us in, Coburn said, and picked the cup back up, and there was, under all the old weather, the ghost of something almost like relief, as though some part of him had been waiting 30 years to be asked to walk back onto a line for someone. Getting out's the part we'll have to earn. The approach took 6 hours, and Jace flew every meter of it at the speed of a man walking through a room full of sleeping dogs. He would not use thrust near the command mass. He had told them so at the start flatly, and then he had shown them why, bringing up on the glass the shape of the thing they were creeping toward. Not a ship, though it had been built like one, but a spawning hull, a thresher command mass, a kilometers-long lattice of dark spines and dead maws, and the fused remains of 100 ships it had eaten and made into itself before the Ashfall Line broke its swarm and left it drifting here to sleep. It gave off nothing. That was the terror of it. On the passive scope it was a hole, an absence, a piece of the dark that had swallowed the stars behind it, and around that absence, faint as a heartbeat, the lifeboat's beacon pulsed on, tucked into the shadow of the sleeping thing like a bird nesting in the mouth of a cannon. It's listening, Jace said. He said it quietly, the way he said everything, but the crew had learned by now to lean toward the quiet. It's dormant, but dormant means listening. It hears 3 things. It hears active drives. It hears scanning arrays, anything that pings, anything that reaches out and touches it. And it hears panic. He turned his head and looked deliberately at Pell, and then at Nin, who had come up from the galley, and then at Valus, taking each of them in. That last one isn't a machine talking. That's me. In the war we learned it wakes to fast movement, to a lot of ships thrashing at once, to the shape of prey behaving like prey. I don't fully know why. Nobody does. But the crews that went in slow and cold and quiet, the crews that moved like they had all the time in the world and nothing to be afraid of, those crews sometimes came out. The crews that got scared and burned hard to get clear woke it every time, every single time. So here's the rule, and it's the only rule, and it's going to be the hardest thing any of you have ever done. He paused. When you get scared in the next 6 hours, and you slow down. You don't speed up. Whatever your body wants to do, you do the opposite. Slow is alive, fast is dead. Say it back to me. Slow is alive, Pell said, white to the lips. Fast is dead. Slow is alive. Fast is dead, said Nin, the little galley hand, whose people were not Celani and not human, but something small and gray and quick, and who had never in a short, quick life been asked to be slow. Slow is alive, Velas said. Fast is dead. Coburn, say it yourself, so they hear you believe it. Slow is alive, Jace Coburn said, and for once there was no distance in it, no old weather, just a man saying the truest thing he knew. Fast is dead. I'm still here because of that sentence. 40,000 people held a gate so I could learn it. Don't waste it. Then he took them in. Velas had thought she understood patience. She had spent her life on freighters, where nothing happened fast and every profit was measured in the slow grind of a hull across the dark. She had not understood patience. Patience was watching Jace Coburn spend 40 minutes crossing a gap he could have burned in 10 seconds, feeding the reaction jets a cough of cold gas and then nothing, and then a cough, and then nothing, drifting the loaded meridian into the shadow of a sleeping god on inertia and prayer, correcting their drift by the width of a hand, and then waiting a quarter of an hour to see if the correction had been enough before he made another. Patience was the command mass filling the whole forward view, a cliff of dead black spines and fused hulls, close enough now that the Meridian's own faint housekeeping glow lit the nearest of them, and Jace not so much as tightening his hands on the controls, because tight hands were the beginning of fast, and fast was dead. At the 4th hour they raised the lifeboat on the passives, and Velas's heart went into her throat, because it was not a lifeboat. It was 3. 3 boats, Dower breathed. It's a cluster. 3 civilian boats drifted together, jammed up against the hull. That's not one beacon failing. That's 3 boats, and only one beacon still has power to squawk. He worked his board with old careful hands. Velas, those are Pilgrim boats. That's a Vale hull code. That's the Halcyon Vale. That's the Pilgrim transport that went missing off the Kell Run 4 weeks ago. It was in every bulletin. 200 souls bound for the Shrine Worlds, lost with all hands. Everyone said Reavers. He looked up, stricken. The Reavers didn't take them. The Reavers ran them into the Reach. Chased them in here to strip them, and the Vale ran deep to get away, and mother of the deep. And they got tangled in the hull field, and they've been sitting here for 4 weeks, cold next to that thing, afraid to light a drive, waiting for a beacon nobody would ever be fool enough to answer. How many alive? Velas said. No way to know from here, not without pinging them, and we can't ping them. Dower's jaw was tight. An active hail is exactly the kind of noise that wakes the mass. If we reach out and touch those boats with anything but a light, we might as well ring a dinner bell. Then we don't ping them, Jace said. We go to them. We come alongside cold, we put a man across on a line, and we knock on the hull with a wrench like civilized people. Old code. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. Anybody alive in there will know it means rescue. Anybody who's been sitting cold for 4 weeks next to that thing will have learned to be quiet, and they'll answer quiet. He was already unbuckling. Dower, you have the seat. Hold us exactly where I put us, and do not, for any reason, touch the drive. Captain, he looked at Velas. I need a second in a suit, and I need it to be someone who won't panic on a tether next to that hull. That's you, or it's nobody. The boy's too green and Nin's too quick. I need slow. Are you slow? Velas Core looked at the cliff of sleeping death filling the forward view, and felt every animal part of her scream to be anywhere else, and heard the man's voice in her head, slow is alive, and made herself breathe out long, the way he did. I'm slow, she said. Then suit up. And Captain, his hand caught her sleeve just for a second, the first time he had touched her, and his eyes held hers, and there was something in them she would carry the rest of her life. Whatever we find over there, however bad, we stay slow. If there are children over there and they're frightened and they run at us, we stay slow. If a boat's opened and there are dead in it, we stay slow. If that hull so much as shifts a spine while we're on the line, we stay slow. The dead over there are already dead. The living are counting on us being the two calmest people in this graveyard. Can you be that? With you next to me, Velas said, yes. Something moved in the young old face, some warmth he did not have many places to put. Then let's go get them, Jace Coburn said, and bring them home. The EVA was the longest 40 minutes of Velas Corps' life, and she spent most of it learning, in her own body, what the man beside her had learned in a war. They went across on a line, hand over hand, two small shapes crossing a black gulf with a sleeping mountain of dead spines above them and 3 cold pilgrim boats below, and every instinct in Velas's body wanted to go fast, to scramble, to get across the killing distance before the god woke, and every time the instinct rose, Jace's voice came into her helmet, low and even, slowing her down. Easy. We've got all the time there is. Look at the hull, not the gap. Move your near hand, then your far hand. Rest again. The boat's not going anywhere, neither's the mountain. We've got all night. And she slowed and slowed, and by the halfway point she understood that this was the actual skill, the whole of it, the thing the legend was made of, not courage in the way she'd imagined courage, not a man charging a line with a light in his hand, but this, the deliberate moment-by-moment mastering of the body's own screaming, the ability to be slow when everything in you demanded fast, over and over, for as long as it took. That was what 40,000 had learned to do at a gate. That was what 9 had come home still able to do. She was doing it now, badly, for 40 minutes, with the best teacher alive breathing steady in her ear, and it was the hardest thing she had ever done, and she thought she might never respect anything so much again. They reached the first boat, and it was dead and empty, its lock hanging open to the void. Its people gone, evacuated, Jace judged, from the way the emergency stores were stripped and the manual lock left cycled, moved to another boat weeks ago. The second boat was sealed and dark, and its beacon was the one still squawking, running on the last of a cell, and when Jace put his gloved hand flat on its hull, he went very still. Warm, he said. Captain, it's warm, there's heat coming through. There are people in this one alive, keeping each other warm in the dark with the power cut down to a candle. Something moved in his voice. Smart. Whoever's running that boat is smart. They cut everything but the beacon and the heat, and they've been sitting cold and quiet for 4 weeks doing exactly the right thing without anyone teaching them. That's a good captain in there. Let's not let them down. He took the battered multi-tool from his hip, the same one that had woken the port recycler, the same one that had freed the frozen clamp, and he folded out the heavy end of it, and he knocked on the hull of the pilgrim boat, slow and deliberate, the way you knock on the door of a house where you know someone is sleeping. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. For a long moment, nothing. Then faint through the hull, through the glove, through 30 years in a war and the whole cold weight of the graveyard. 3 taps back. Velas Corps wept inside her helmet quietly, so the man beside her would not have to manage her fear on top of everything else, and she was slow about it, and no one woke, and behind the sealed lock of a pilgrim boat tucked into the shadow of a sleeping god, someone who had been alone in the dark for 4 weeks knocked 3 times on a hull to say, I'm here, I'm alive. I heard you. And the 2 calmest people in the graveyard began, slowly, to bring them home. There were 31 of them, and 11 were children, and the man who had kept them alive was a shrine keeper named Orit Saul, who had never flown anything in his life. Jace got them across in pairs, over 4 hours on the line, slow. He would not rush it, and he would not let the pilgrims rush it, and the hardest part, Velas saw it, and would never forget it, was the children, because children are fast. Children are made of fast, and every child who came out of that boat came out with 4 weeks of terror in them, and a body that wanted nothing in the universe so much as to scramble across the line to the warm ship and get away from the dark. And Jace Coburn, one of the 9, who had stood at the cinder gate, spent 4 hours teaching frightened alien children how to be slow. He was extraordinary at it, and it undid Velas to watch. He had no soft words. The man had almost no words at all, but he had something better, a total, unhurried steadiness that the children fell into like a current. He would clip a child to the line and take their small gloved hands in his, and he would not say don't be scared because he was not a liar. He would say in his flat, even voice, "You're going to be scared the whole way across. That's all right. Scared is fine. We're going to be scared and slow. Move your near hand. Good. Now rest. Now the far hand. Good. We've got all the time there is." And the child would go across slow, terrified and slow, alive and slow. And on the far side Pell and Nin would pull them in through the lock into the light and the warmth of the meridian. And Jace would clip on the next one and start again. For 4 hours, 31 times, never once faster, never once louder, while above them the sleeping god held its breath and did not wake. The last one across was the shrine keeper, or Itsal, an old Selani with kind, exhausted eyes, and he would not go until every soul in his charge was safe on the freighter. And when at last Jace clipped him to the line, the old man gripped the human's arm. "For weeks," Itsal said over the suit channel, his voice cracked. "I kept telling them help would come. I didn't believe it. Nobody answers a beacon in the Reach. I told them to keep them from despairing, and I didn't believe a word of it myself. Who are you? What kind of ship answers a beacon next to that?" "A freight ship," Jay said. "Come on near hand, then far hand. We've got all the time there is." And they went across, the old shrine keeper and the young survivor slow, into the light, and the lock cycled shut behind them. And 31 pilgrims stood crammed and weeping and alive in the cargo throat of the core meridian. And Velas Core peeled off her helmet with shaking hands and looked at the man who had just spent 8 hours doing the impossible 1 slow meter at a time, and found she had nothing at all to say that would not have embarrassed him. So she said the only thing that fit. "Slow is alive," she said. "Slow is alive," Jace agreed and almost smiled. And then the deck shifted under them, a long, low tremor that ran up through their boots and into their teeth, and every light on the flight deck above turned amber at once. And Tava's Dower's voice came down the ladder, no longer slow, no longer calm, stretched thin with the thing they had all been dreading for 6 hours. "It moved," the old engineer said. "Velas, Coburn, get up here, the mass, it's moving. Something we did. The heat, the 31 bodies, the lock cycling, something, it hurt us. It's waking up." Tava's Dower had been afraid twice in his long life before that hour. Once when the militia came for his brother, and once, 40 years later, at Velas's father's bedside. This was the 3rd time, and it was worse than both. And what made it worse was watching the young human come up the ladder onto the flight deck and not be afraid at all. "Talk to me," Coburn said, sliding into the left seat, and his voice had not changed, and that steadiness was the most frightening and the most reassuring thing Dower had ever heard, both at once. "What's it doing?" "Exactly. Small words." "Spines," Dower said. "The dead spines on the near flank. They were fixed for 300 years. Now 3 of them have moved, slow, like a man rolling over in his sleep. And there's a Coburn, there's a signature building in the core, faint, but it's climbing. It was flat for 3 centuries and now it's climbing." "How fast?" "Slow but not stopping. It's like watching a fire catch. 1 coal, then 2. Give it an hour and I think it's all the way awake. And we are 800 meters off its flank with 31 extra souls aboard and a cold reactor that'll take 20 minutes to bring to burn." "Then we don't bring it to burn," Coburn said. "Not yet. We have to run. If we run, we die." Coburn said it flatly, the way he said everything, and it landed harder for it. "Listen to me, Dower, because I've seen this exact thing and lived, and almost nobody else has. A command mass waking up isn't like a man waking up. It doesn't open its eyes and look around. It comes up in stages, and the stages matter. And if you understand the stages, you can walk out of its range while it's still deciding your food. First, it wakes its senses. That's what's happening now, the spines moving, that's it ranging, feeling the water. It can't see yet. It can only feel movement and heat and noise close in. Second stage, minutes from now, it'll start keying. It picks the biggest, loudest, fastest signature within its reach, and it decides that's the thing to swarm. Third stage, it swarms. It makes spawn out of whatever it caught, and it goes back to sleep fat. He was watching the scope, utterly still. We are the only warm, loud, fast thing in its reach. Right now, we're what it's going to key on. If we light our drive and run, we make ourselves the loudest, fastest thing in the whole reach, and we win the prize, and it swarms us, and everyone on this ship becomes part of that hull forever. That's not fear talking, Dower. That's arithmetic. I watched it happen to better ships than this one. The flight deck was silent. Below, in the cargo throat, 31 pilgrims had gone quiet, sensing through the deck plates that something was wrong. Velas Core came up the ladder and heard the last of it and asked the only question that mattered. Then, what do? We give it something louder to key on, Coburn said, and we leave while it's chasing that instead of us. There's nothing louder than us out here, Dower said. We're the only live ship in. There will be, Coburn said, in about 20 minutes because the Reavers are coming back. Dower stared at him. What? The mother pack. They peeled off 2 days ago because we went dark and they lost us. But we didn't just go dark 2 days ago, Dower. We've been throwing heat and cycling locks and moving 31 bodies around next to the single biggest landmark in this reach for the last 8 hours. Reavers live off this graveyard. They watch it. A cold freighter they lose in the hulks, that's a shrug. But 8 hours of activity right up against the great command mass, the one hull nobody's ever been able to strip because it's death to go near it. He almost smiled, and it was not a warm thing. That's the richest sign they've ever seen. Somebody found a way to work the big hull. That's a fortune. The mother's not going to be able to resist it. She's going to come in to see what we found, and she's going to come in loud, because Reavers don't know the stages. They just know the old rule, go fast near the sleepers, and they think fast means safe. Fast means seen. They're going to come into range hot and greedy, 3 or 4 hulls burning, and the moment they do, they're going to be the loudest, fastest thing in the mass's reach, and it's going to key on them instead of us. Velas felt the cold shape of it settle in her stomach. You want to use the Reavers as bait. I want to be alive, Coburn said. The Reavers coming in is going to happen whether I want it or not. They're already on their way, Dower. Check the far edge. You'll find them lighting up inside 10 minutes. All I'm choosing is what we do when they get here. And what we do is nothing. We sit cold. We don't move, we don't burn, we don't so much as breathe hard. The Reavers come in hot, the mass wakes the rest of the way up and keys on them, and it swarms them, all 4 hulls, right there on its flank. And while it's doing that, while it's busy, while every spine it's got is reaching for the loud, fast, greedy things that came to rob it, we drift. Cold. Out along the one line the mass isn't watching, which is the line back toward the things it's already eaten, the dead field, the direction nothing living ever comes from. We go out the back door while it eats the Reavers at the front. Nobody spoke for a moment. That's monstrous, Dower said quietly, but there was no accusation in it. It was almost awe. It's the Reavers who ran 200 pilgrims into this reach to strip them, Velas said just as quietly, and found she meant it. The Halcyon Vale, 4 weeks ago. The mother down there chased those boats into the dark to rob them and left them to die next to that thing. 31 of them lived. The rest, she looked at the shrine keeper's face in her memory, at the 11 children in her cargo throat. The Reavers made this graveyard their business. Let the graveyard settle the account. There's a problem, Coburn said, and now the calm cracked just slightly, the first real difficulty crossing his face. The Reavers might not come close enough. Or they might come, see the mass waking, and run before it fully keys on them. Reavers are cowards. That's the whole reason they work. And a coward might just save himself and leave us as the only prize on the board. And if the mass wakes all the way up and there's nothing louder than us for it to key on, then it keys on us. And we're 800 meters away with a cold reactor, and slow won't save us anymore, because it'll already be awake and hunting, and slow is only alive while it's still asleep. He looked at the scope. I need to make sure. I need to give the mass something to chase that isn't us and isn't going to lose its nerve and run. Something loud that'll sit still and scream and pull every spine that thing has away from our line. A decoy, Vela said. A decoy, Coburn agreed. And I've got one. The dead boat. The first Pilgrim boat, the empty one. Its beacon's dead, but its power cell isn't. I saw it when we passed, half a charge left. If I go back over there cold, and I take the beacon out of the boat we just emptied, the live one, the one that's been squawking, the one whose signal the mass can already hear, and I wire it into the dead boat's cell and set the whole thing on a slow drift straight into the mass's near flank, screaming on every band, loud as a war siren, then it doesn't matter what the reavers do. Brave or cowardly, close or far, it doesn't matter. The loudest, fastest, most alive-looking thing in that mass's whole reach is going to be a Pilgrim beacon flying straight down its throat, and it is going to key on that and swarm that. And while it's eating a beacon 800 meters that way, we drift out the back door 800 meters the other way. Cold, slow, quiet, home. The flight deck was silent. You want to go back out, Vela said. Alone to the boat, next to that thing while it's waking up. Yes. No. Captain. No. She stood over him, 26 years old, and she did not shake, and Dower thought, watching her, that her father would have wept to see it. You've spent this whole voyage refusing to take my decisions out of my hands. Now I'm keeping one. That's my ship out there and my beacon and my graveyard, and I am not going to sit warm on this deck and watch the last of the Ashfall Line go out alone onto a hull to die so House Core can make its turn. If the beacon has to be rigged and flown, then two of us go and rig it, the way two of us went and got the Pilgrims, slow, together, and two of us come back. You don't get to walk onto the line alone this time. Not on my ship. I won't have it. Slow is alive, and slow means nobody goes alone. Jace Coburn looked up at her for a long moment, and something in the young old face that had been shut for 30 years came all the way open. All right, he said, together get your suit. And Dower, he turned to the old engineer, when the reavers light up you call it, and you do not for any reason touch that drive. If we're not back and the mass key's wrong, you take this ship and the 31 and my captain's whole house and you drift it out the back door yourself, cold and slow, and you don't come back for us. Say it. I'll not say that, Dower growled. Say it or I go alone and she stays here. A long silence. The old engineer's jaw worked. I'll say it, Tava's Dower said at last, hating it. But I'll not do it, and you know I'll not, and that's between me and the deep. And it was as close to a yes as either of them was going to get, and Coburn took it, because he was a man who had learned to take what people could actually give. They went out into the dark for the second time in one day, and this time the sleeping god was waking, and Vela's core learned what slow cost when the thing you were being slow in front of had begun to stir. The command mass no longer held its breath. She could feel it through the line, through her boots when they touched a spar, a low structural groan that had not been there 4 hours ago, the sound of a thing kilometers long shifting its weight for the first time in 300 years. Spines that had been fixed as statuary now moved, slow and blind and terrible, sweeping the dark, feeling for the shape of prey. One of them passed above the two of them as they crossed to the dead Pilgrim boat, a black blade the length of the meridian sweeping through the space they had crossed a minute before, and Velas's whole body seized to bolt, to fly down the line, to be anywhere but under that blind sweeping edge, and Jace's voice came into her helmet even as ever, slow. It can't see. It's feeling. If you thrash, it feels you. If you drift, you're just more dark, near hand, rest. We've got all the time there is. And she made herself be dark. She made herself be nothing. She hung under the sweeping blade of a waking god and moved one hand and then rested, and the blade passed on, blind, and did not find her, because she was slow, because a man who had learned it at a gate 300 kilometers and 30 years away was teaching it to her 1 meter at a time. They reached the dead boat. Jace worked fast now. Fast hands were safe when the hands were on metal and not on thrust, and his hands on the beacon and the power cell were the fastest and surest she had ever seen, the battered multi-tool flicking open and folding shut, stripping the live beacon from its housing, splicing it to the dead boat's half-charged cell with the unthinking economy of a man who had wired 1,000 desperate things together in the dark under worse pressure than this. He worked and he talked. Low, steady, and Veilous understood he was talking to keep her slow. "In the war," he said, splicing, "we didn't have decoys at first. We learned them. The masses would key on our biggest ships and swarm them, and we couldn't stop it, and we lost a lot of ships that way before somebody figured out you could throw the key. Take a dead hull, wire a screaming beacon into it, fly it at the mass, and the mass takes the loud dead thing instead of the quiet live one. Simple, stupid. It worked. It's the reason there was a line at all by day 19. Not the guns barely mattered, you can't shoot a hunger. The decoys, the patience, old freighter tricks, half of it. The people who won the gate weren't warriors, most of them. They were mechanics and haulers and dock rats who knew how to fool a machine with junk and a wrench." He sealed the splice. "I was a freight pilot before the war, Captain. Did you know that? That's not a cover story, that's just true. I hauled grain. And then the war came, and it turned out grain haulers were exactly what the galaxy needed because we knew how to be slow and patient and clever with junk, and that's the whole of what beat the swarm. Not heroes, haulers." The beacon woke in his hands, and its telltale went from dead to live, and he cupped it a moment against his chest to keep its light from spilling like a man sheltering a candle. "There. She's screaming on every band. Loudest thing in the reach. Now we point her at the mass and let her go, and then we go home slow, and we don't look back." He set the beacon into the empty husk of the dead boat, and he braced against the boat's spine, and he gave it a long, even two-handed shove, no thrust, no charge, just the strength of a man's arms, out of the shadow and down toward the near flank of the waking god. A dead pilgrim boat with a war siren wired into its heart, drifting slow and screaming into the dark. And the mass heard it. Veilous felt the whole kilometers-long structure shift at once, a great blind turning, every moving spine on the near flank swinging around toward the screaming thing that had just entered its reach. And the low structural groan climbed into something that was almost a voice, and the coarse signature that Dower had watched climbing for hours flared, and the god that had slept 300 years opened at last, all the way, and reached for the loudest thing in the dark, which was not the core meridian, and was not the two small slow shapes on a line, but a dead boat with a beacon in it, flying down its throat. "Now," Jace said, and there was iron under the calm now, the first urgency she had heard from him, but even the urgency was slow. "Back to the ship, steady. It's awake and it's blind and it's reaching for the beacon, which means the one thing we must not do is move fast enough to feel like prey. We drift back. Now, Captain, with me, near hand, rest, home." They went back along the line hand over hand, while a god woke at their backs and swarmed a screaming decoy. And it was the longest and the slowest and the most terrible crossing of Veilous Core's life. And she did every meter of it slow, because the man beside her had spent 30 years learning that slow was the only thing that had ever beaten the dark, and he had taught it to her, and it held. They were 10 meters from the Meridian's lock when Dower's voice came over the channel, tight as wire. "Reavers," the old engineer said, "4 hulls. Coming in hot on the far flank, burning full, greedy as you called it. Coburn, they've seen the mass moving, they've seen the beacon. They think we found a way to work the big hull and they're racing us for it. They're going to come right in on top of the whole thing." A pause. "And the mass has felt them. Coburn, it's splitting. Half its spines are still going for your decoy, but half of them just turned toward the Reavers. It's keying on 2 things at once. The records never said it could key on 2. "Get us inside," Jace said, and now finally at the very end he moved fast, but it was the right fast, the fast of a man who has calculated to the meter exactly when slow ends and speed begins, hauling Veilous the last 10 meters to the lock as the god behind them came fully and finally awake and reached, blind and vast and hungry, for everything loud in the dark at once. "Dower, The second the lock seals, you don't burn, you drift. Puff us off the hull on cold gas back door, exactly the line I marked. The mass is busy. It's got a beacon and 4 reavers to eat. It won't feel one cold freighter tiptoeing out the back, but only if we're cold, only if we're slow. Seal us in and take us out, old man, nice and quiet. Nobody dies today who doesn't already deserve to. The lock cycled, the lock sealed, and the core meridian, cold and dark and full of 31 saved pilgrims and 1 legend, and the young woman who had refused to let him die alone, breathed itself off the flank of a waking god on nothing but cold gas and patience, and began, 1 silent meter at a time, to tiptoe out the back door of the deepest grave in the galaxy, while the god behind it ate the loud and the greedy and the cruel. The drift out took 9 hours, and for the first 3 of them, the thing that had woken behind them screamed. Not with sound, there was no sound in the dark, but on every band Dower's passive scope could read, a rising storm of energy as the command mass came fully to life and reached for everything loud in its reach. The decoy beacon died first, swarmed and silenced within the first half hour, its scream cut off mid-pulse as the mass closed over the dead boat and began, patiently, horribly, to take it apart and make it into more of itself. And then the reavers. Velis did not watch that part on the scope, and she made Pell stop watching it, and she took the boy down into the cargo throat where 31 pilgrims sat crammed in the dark and the cold with the power cut to a candle, and she sat among them and held the hand of an old shrine keeper, and did not watch a mother reaver and her pack die the death they had earned. But she heard Dower's flat voice on the channel, marking it, because the old engineer felt he owed it to the record to see. 4 hulls, burning hot, greedy, racing each other in for a prize that did not exist, and a god waking under them. 3 of them the mass took in the first hour. The 4th the mother, Dower thought, the careful one, the one who had sent her pack in first and hung back to watch. The 4th saw the others die, and did the thing reavers always did, the thing that was their whole nature, and ran. Lit her drive full and ran for the edge of the reach, fast, loud, alive, saving herself, leaving the graveyard the way she had always left it, richer or emptier but always alive. And the mass followed her. It's chasing the runner, Dower said, wonder and horror in his old voice. It's not staying with its kills. It woke up hungry and the loudest thing in its reach just turned and fled, and it's following the flight. It's peeling off the whole flank to chase 1 reaver toward the edge. Coburn, that's the opposite of what it's going the wrong way. It's going toward the edge, toward the shipping lanes, toward the reaver, Jay said quietly from the flight seat, which is running for the edge, which is running for its home nest on the rim of the reach where reavers hole up, a long pause, where reavers keep everything they've stripped for 30 years, where the rest of the pack lives. Nobody said anything. It'll follow her all the way home, Jay said. That's what they do. They key on a fleeing thing and they don't let go until they've eaten it and everything near it. She's going to lead a waking command mass straight into the reaver nest. He set his hands in his lap. I won't pretend that grieves me. The nest that fed on this reach for 30 years, that ran the halcyon veil into the dark, I won't light a candle for it. But it means the mass is going away from us fast, chasing the runner toward the rim. And that gives us the one thing I didn't dare hope for. He looked at Dower. A clear back door. Take us out, old man. Same as before, cold and slow. We've got the whole deep to ourselves now, and a god chasing a coward the other way, and a turn to make. They cleared the last of the hulks at the 9th hour, and the reach thinned around them, and the stars came back, clean and cold and countless. And Velis Core stood on the flight deck and watched the graveyard fall away behind them and did not entirely believe it. We're out, Dower said. He said it the way a man says a word he's afraid to trust. Passive scope's clean. We're through the field. We're out, Velis. We're on the far side of the Thren Reach with the whole crew and 31 souls we didn't have when we went in. He turned in his seat and looked at the young human in the left seat, and the old engineer's face did a thing Velis had never seen it do. Boy, in 300 years, I don't think anybody's flown into the deep of that reach and come out the far side. Not once. Reavers work the edge. Salvage crews die on the rim. Nobody goes to the middle. Nobody goes near the command mass. You flew a loaded freighter to the bottom of the worst grave in the galaxy, pulled 31 people out of it, woke a god, and walked out the back door slow enough that it never knew you were there. He shook his head slowly. I've been 40 years an engineer and I didn't know it could be done. It can't usually, Jace said. He picked up the dented cup, found it empty, set it down again. It could be done today because the Reavers came when they came and ran where they ran, and because your captain kept her nerve on a line under a waking spine, and because you held this ship exactly where I put it for 9 hours without touching the drive once, which I know cost you more than any of it. It wasn't me. It was never one person. That's the thing nobody remembers about the line. There weren't 9 heroes. There were 40,000 people each doing one slow, careful thing at the right time, and it held because all of them held, and the 9 of us who came off it, we didn't do more than the ones who didn't. We just happened to be standing where the fire wasn't at the end. He looked out at the clean stars. I've spent 30 years letting people call me one of the 9 like it meant I was worth 39,991 others. It never did. It just meant I got to keep going. That's all surviving ever means. You get to keep going, and you try to be worth the fire the others walked into so you could. The flight deck was quiet. Somewhere below, in the cargo throat, a child laughed. The first child's laugh anyone had heard in weeks. A small bright sound coming up through the deck plates, and it changed the air on the flight deck the way a window changes a room. Well, Dower said gruffly, blinking hard. You kept going into the middle of a graveyard to pull out somebody else's pilgrims for no fee. Seems to me that's being worth it. Seems to me that's exactly what being worth it looks like. Jace Coburn did not answer that. But Valus, watching him, saw the words land somewhere in him that had not had anything land in it for a long time, and saw him hold still under them the way he held still under everything, and understood that this, too, was a kind of slow, that the man had learned to take a hard mercy the same way he took a hard fear, one careful meter at a time, so that it could not knock him down. The Kell turn was 4 days out, and they did not have 4 days of fuel, because 8 hours of cold gas maneuvering and a full loaded run had eaten the margins Valus had counted to the gram. She found the number on the 3rd night, alone in the galley with the ledger and the fuel log, and she sat with it for a long time. They could make the Kell worlds. They could make them late, a day late, maybe more, with the reserves scraped and the recyclers running the reaction mass down to fumes. A day late meant the cold stores held or didn't. The seed libraries could take a day. The spine clinic's cryogenic store was the question. The enzymes and the gene lines that the outer Kell were dying for want of, rated to hold a temperature for a fixed window and no longer. A day late might mean the whole delicate half of the cargo was slag. A day late might mean the Kell lost the season anyway, and House Core made no fee, and 31 saved pilgrims had cost 11 billion strangers their crop. Slow is alive, she thought bitterly, staring at the number. Slow is alive, but slow is also late, and late has its own graveyard. Jace found her there. He did not ask what was wrong. He read it off the ledger and the fuel log in a glance, the way he read everything. You're short, he said. By about a day, maybe more. The cold stores might hold. The clinic store won't. Not a full day over its window. She rubbed her face. I made the right call going in for the pilgrims. I'd make it again. But right calls have costs, and this one's cost is that the Kell might lose their season anyway, and there's no slow, careful trick that puts fuel back in a tank. Jace was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down across the little galley table from her, which he had never done. The man ate standing in his corner, always, and he set the dented cup down between them, and he looked at the fuel log the way he'd looked at the strut gauge at Corbin Drift, the way he looked at things he was already fixing. There's a slow, careful trick, he said. That puts fuel back in a tank. It's an old hauler trick. It's ugly and it's slow and it costs us 3 days of misery and it'll get your clinic store to the Kell inside its window. He turned the log toward her and put a blunt finger on the reaction mass line. "You're burning reaction mass to run the recyclers and the heat and the housekeeping. All of it. Full ship, 36 people now, everything warm and running. That's your leak." So we stopped the leak. We cut the ship down to the bone, same as we did in the deep, one warm compartment, the cargo throat, everyone in it together, sharing heat like the Pilgrims did in their boat for 4 weeks. We cut the recyclers to survival and run the scrubbers by hand. We cut the heat everywhere but the one room. We fly her cold and mean and uncomfortable, 36 of us packed in one hold, breathing each other's air and hating it, for 3 days, and every gram of reaction mass we don't spend keeping an empty ship warm goes into the tank instead, and the tank makes the turn and the clinic store makes its window. He almost smiled. It's a miserable trick. The Pilgrims already know how to do it. They did it for a month. The rest of us will learn. It's not heroic and it's not clever and it's mostly just being cold and cramped and patient for 3 days. But it works. It's the same thing that always works. Slow, careful, junk and patience. You want to save the Kell their season, Captain. Then we all get cold together and we don't complain and we make the turn. Velis Kaur looked at the man across her galley table, the last of the Ashfall Line, one of 9, the legend she'd hired for 900 marks, offering her a way to save 11 billion strangers that amounted to being cold and cramped and patient in a crowded room. And she started, helplessly, to laugh, and then found the laugh had tears in it, and let it have them. "Junk and patience," she said. "Junk and patience," Jace Coburn agreed. "It's the only thing my whole species was ever any good at. Turns out it's enough more often than you'd think." They cut the ship down to the bone the next morning, and for 3 days 36 people lived crammed together in the cargo throat of the core meridian in the cold and the near dark. And Velis Kaur would remember it afterward as one of the warmest times of her life. It should not have been. It was miserable by every measure that could be counted. The heat was cut everywhere but the one hold, and even there it was kept low, low enough that everyone slept in every layer they owned and breathed steam and huddled close for the warmth of other bodies. The scrubbers ran by hand, someone always turning the crank in shifts, a dull ache of a job that Pell organized into a rota, and the older Pilgrim children fought to be allowed to help with, because a child would rather have a job than be afraid. The food was cold. The light was a single strip. And the reaction mass that all of this misery saved crept, gram by gram, back into the margin, until Dower could say on the second day that the turn was made. The clinic store would reach the Kell inside its window. The season was saved, and nobody cheered because cheering took heat, but 36 people smiled in the near dark, and that was better. The warmth was in the crowding. That was the thing Velis had not expected. 31 Pilgrims who had spent 4 weeks certain they would die alone in the cold now spent 3 days pressed shoulder to shoulder with the crew who had come into the graveyard to get them. And something happened in that hold that did not have a name but that everyone in it felt. The children learned the crew's names and then would not stop using them. Nin, the quick little galley hand, taught the Pilgrim children a counting game from a world none of them had ever heard of, and the hold filled softly with the sound of alien children learning to count in a dead language. Old Orit Saul, the shrine keeper, told the Pilgrim stories, the small ones, the ones about home, to keep them facing forward. And Tava's Dower, who had lost a brother to the war and lit a candle every year for 30 years, sat in the corner of the warm hold with a Pilgrim infant asleep on his chest, and did not move for 6 hours so as not to wake it, and looked, Velis thought, more at peace than she had ever seen him. Jace Coburn kept to the edge of it at first. Old habit. He took the hardest shifts on the scrubber crank and the coldest watches on the flight deck, and he ate standing in his corner facing the door, and he was, as ever, the quietest person in any room. But the children would not let him keep his edge. Children never do. The fastest of them, a small, fierce girl named Isu, who had been the hardest to bring across the line. She was the one who had wanted most to scramble, whose 4 weeks of terror had gone deepest, whose small hands Jace had held all the way across the dark while he taught her to be slow. This girl attached herself to the human the way a burr attaches to a coat, and would not be removed. "Teach me the slow thing," she demanded on the first cold night, planting herself in front of him in the crowded hold. "The slow is a live thing. I want to learn it right. I did it scared. I want to do it not scared." And Jace Coburn, one of the 9 who did not have soft words, looked down at the small, fierce alien child who had decided he was hers, and something in the young old face eased, and he sat down on the cold deck so that he was at her height, and he said, "All right. But here's the first thing, and it's the most important, and most people never learn it. You don't do the slow thing not scared. There's no such thing as not scared. You do the slow thing while you're scared. That's the whole trick. Brave isn't not being afraid. Brave is being afraid and moving your near hand anyway, and then resting, and then moving your far hand. That's all it ever is. Anybody who tells you they weren't scared is either lying or wasn't paying attention. The scared is how you know it matters. Now, give me your near hand." And in the cold, crowded hold, for 3 days, the last surviving pilot of the Ashfall Line taught a frightened alien child how to be brave, one careful hand at a time, and did not know that half the hold had gone quiet to listen, and that an old shrine keeper was watching him with the beginning of a terrible dawning recognition, and that Valus Core from the shadows was watching the whole thing and thinking that the galaxy had lit its candles for the wrong reason for 30 years, not for what 9 men survived, but for what one of them was still doing, quietly in the cold, for a child who would never know she'd been taught to be brave by a legend. It was Sal who put it together, on the second night, and it was Sal who almost undid the whole quiet thing. The old shrine keeper had been watching Jace for a day and a night, watching the mark on the forearm that showed when the human sleeve rode up on the scrubber crank, watching the way the crew's old engineer treated the young pilot with a deference that made no sense for a hired stick, watching the way the man taught the children to be slow, and the way he'd flown a graveyard nobody could fly. And on the second night, in the warm dark of the crowded hold, with the pilgrims settling toward sleep, the shrine keeper did what shrine keepers do, which was to tell a story to hold the dark back. And the story he chose was the one every child of the settled worlds knew, the story of the Ashfall Line. He told it well. He told it the way it was told at the shrines in the old cadence, the 40,000 and the 19 days and the 11 billion who fled down the road behind them, the fire and the standing and the 9 who came home. And the pilgrim children listened wide-eyed the way children have listened to that story for 300 years, and the pilgrim adults lowered their voices with the old reflex. And in his corner Jace, Coburn cranked the scrubber slow, and even and listened to his own life, told back to him as a legend by a man who did not know he was in the room. And then Sal came to the end of it to the 9, and he stopped, and in the warm dark he turned his kind, exhausted eyes to the human in the corner, and he said, gently, so gently, "There are 9 holders of the Cinderguard mark alive in all the galaxy. I have spent my life at a shrine to the line, and I have met none of them. Most keep their marks covered. Most want nothing to do with what they did. I understand that better now than I ever did before, having sat 4 weeks in the cold with a beacon nobody would answer." He paused. "A man answered our beacon, a man who flies a graveyard cold and teaches children to be slow, and carries a mark on his arm that I have prayed toward every day of my life without ever thinking I would see it on living skin." His old voice trembled. "I will not name you if you don't wish it. I only ask because I have earned the asking, I think, having nearly died for one of you. I only ask that you let an old shrine keeper know he is not mad, that the line came for us after all, that one of the 9 flew into the deep to pull 31 strangers out of the dark." The hold had gone silent. Every pilgrim was looking at the quiet human in the corner. The children did not understand, and understood completely in the way of children. And Jace Coburn stopped cranking the scrubber and set his hands in his lap, and Valus watched 30 years of careful invisibility come to the edge of a cliff, and understood that this was the moment, that whatever the man said now was the thing he would have to be for the rest of the voyage and maybe the rest of his life, and she drew breath to save him from it, to step in, to be the captain and change the subject and give him the door out. And Jace Coburn spoke first. "You're not mad," he said quietly to the old shrine keeper. "The line came for you. I'm one of the 9. He said it flatly, without weight, the way he said everything, and somehow the flatness made it land harder than any grand admission could have. "My name is Jace Coburn. I flew screen for the 3rd Regiment at the Cinder Gate for 19 days, and on the last day the fire took everyone I ever loved, and I have spent 30 years hauling grain so that nobody would ever ask me to be worth them again. And 4 weeks ago your beacon started squawking, and a captain I'd known for 3 days decided to answer it, and I flew her ship into the deep to bring you out, and I'd do it again, and none of that makes me worth the 39,991 who didn't come home." He looked around the hold at the pilgrims, at the children, at the small fierce girl named Isu who was staring at him with her whole heart. "So here's what I'll ask you since you asked me. Don't light a candle for me. I'm not a candle. I'm a freight pilot who got out. If you want to honor the line, then when you get to your shrine worlds and you plant your season, and your children grow up safe on the road we held, you be worth it. You be slow and careful and kind, and you pull the next stranger out of the next dark, whoever you are, whatever it costs, and you don't make a legend out of it, you just do it because it needed doing. That's the whole of what the line was. That's the only monument any of us ever wanted." He picked the scrubber crank back up. "Now let an old soldier crank his shift in peace, shrine keeper. There's a child over here who still owes me a lesson in being slow." And Oritsal bowed his head and wept, and did not name him again. And the hold after a moment breathed and settled, and the small fierce girl came and sat by the human's knee. And Valus Kor from the shadows let out the breath she'd been holding to save him with, and found he had not needed saving, because a man who has learned to take a hard fear 1 meter at a time can also, it turns out, take a hard grace the same way and stand. They came up on the outer Kel worlds on the 4th day, cold and cramped and whole, and a Kel patrol cutter met them 2 hours out and nearly arrested the lot of them. Valus had expected trouble at the port. A fuel-starved freighter limping in a day late always drew questions, but she had not expected the cutter to come out hard, weapons live, and hail them with the clipped fury of a border officer who thinks he has caught someone at something. She took the hail herself, on the flight deck, with Jace beside her in the left seat and Dower at the board, and the Kel officer's face on the glass was tight with suspicion. "Freighter Corps Meridian, you are running a manifest for the Kel Relief Trust and a transponder that's been dark for 11 days, the officer said. "You come out of the dead reach a day late, cold, with your recyclers scrubbing 36 life signs off a hull rated for 8. You want to explain to me how a grain hauler comes out of the Thren Reach with 28 extra bodies aboard, or do you want to explain it to a magistrate?" His jaw was hard. "Because I'll tell you what it looks like from here. It looks like a smuggler running people through a war grave. And the last ship that tried to run people near that reach was a pilgrim transport called the Halcyon Vale, and it vanished 4 weeks ago with 200 souls. And there are families on my world still lighting lamps for it. So you'll forgive me if I don't much like the look of your extra bodies, Captain." And Valus Kor, who had spent her whole life being talked down to by border officers, opened her mouth to explain. And behind her, in the cargo throat, old Oritsal heard the words Halcyon Vale come up through the deck, and the shrine keeper came up the ladder and stepped into the cutter's view, and the Kel officer's hard face fell open like a dropped plate. "Keeper Saul," the officer said. He said it the way a man says a name off a memorial. "You're the Vale's roster listed you, lost with all hands. My own aunt lit a lamp for you. You're 31 of us are alive, officer," Oritsal said gently. 11 of them children. The reavers ran us into the Reach 4 weeks ago, and we drifted cold in the deep next to the great dead hull, squawking a beacon we didn't believe anyone would ever answer. And someone answered. He put his hand on the back of Jace Coburn's flight seat. This ship answered. This captain turned off her schedule and her fee and flew into the deepest grave in the galaxy to pull us out of the dark, slow and cold and careful, and got every one of us out, and then packed us into one warm room and starved her own ship of fuel for 3 days so that your relief cargo would still make its window. So before you speak to her about magistrates, officer, you might send word home to put out the lamps for the veil and light better ones. The Kell officer's mouth worked. On the glass behind him, Valus could see the rest of the cutter's bridge crew going still, one after another, as the words reached them. You went into the deep of the Thren Reach, the officer said slowly, and came out. Yes, Jace Coburn said. Nobody does that. Nobody's ever done that. Somebody had to, Jace said. There were people in there. And Valus watched the Kell officer look at the quiet human in the left seat, at the plain young face and the old weather eyes, and she saw the officer begin to understand that he was looking at something he did not have a category for. And she thought, here it comes, the candles, the legend, the man made into a monument in front of her, and she made a decision. And she made it fast, because for once being fast was the right thing. His name is Coburn, he's my pilot, and he'd rather you didn't make a fuss, Valus said crisp, before the officer could ask the question forming on his face. The fuss embarrasses him, and we've got a spine clinic's cold store aboard that's 6 hours from its window. So here's what I'd take instead of a fuss, officer, if the Kell Trust is grateful. You clear us to the relief dock ahead of the queue, you get the medics down to see 31 pilgrims who have spent a month in the cold, and you let a tired crew deliver its cargo and go home. That's all. That's the whole ask. Can the Kell do that? The officer looked at her, then at the shrine keeper, then, for a long moment, at the human who had flown a graveyard cold and did not want a parade for it. The Kell, he said at last quietly, and there was something new in his voice, something that had put its suspicion down and picked up something heavier, can do a great deal more than that, Captain. But we'll start there. He straightened, and did a thing Valus had never seen a border officer do to a freighter crew. He brought his hand up flat to his brow and held it, and his bridge crew behind him did the same, a whole cutter's watch saluting an old grain hauler coming cold out of a grave. Priority clearance to the relief dock, core meridian, medics standing by. And Captain, welcome to the Kell. You've no idea yet where you've brought them home to. I'll let our harbor master tell you that part. It's her story to tell. The harbor master of the outer Kell relief port was an old woman named Sela Ven, and she met them on the dock herself, and she told Valus Core the thing the officer had not. The pilgrims came off first, into the arms of medics and the light of a real sun through the dock's high windows, 31 of them, blinking, weeping, alive. The children came off last, herded by Nin and Pell, and the small fierce girl Isu would not go down the ramp until she had found Jace Coburn in the crowd and marched up to him and taken his near hand and moved it deliberately, and then rested, and then moved his far hand, showing him she'd learned it, showing him she could be slow. And Jace Coburn crouched down on the dock in front of the child and let her show him, and told her quietly that she was the bravest slow person he'd ever taught. And the girl went down the ramp into a new world glowing like a lamp. And while that happened, old Sela Ven stood beside Valus at the rail and watched the human crouched on the dock with the child, and she said, without preamble, in the way of the very old, "Do you know what world you've delivered your cargo to, Captain Core?" "The outer Kell," Valus said. "The relief trust. The wither took your crops and the border tax took your doctors, and you needed the seed and the clinic store before the season turned." "Yes, all true, but that's the now of it." The old harbor master's eyes were on Jace. "Here's the then of it. 300 years ago, the outer Kell worlds did not exist. My people lived on the inner colonies on the far side of the Thren Reach, on the wrong side of the road when the long burn came. 11 billion people had to be moved down the road before the swarm broke through, and there was only one road, and it ran through the Cinder Gate, and the only reason there was time to move 11 billion people down it was that 40,000 strangers stood at the gate and burned so the road would stay open. She paused. My great-grandmother was 4 years old when they carried her down that road. Everyone on the outer Kell is descended from someone who came down that road in those 19 days. Every soul on this world, Captain, every one of the people your cargo will feed this season, is alive because 40,000 people they never met stood at a gate 300 years ago and did not break. She turned and looked at Velas full on. The officer told me your pilot flew the deep of the reach and came out. He told me he carries a mark he'd rather keep covered. I have been harbor master here for 50 years, Captain. At the end of the road, the line held open, and I have met a great many people who owed their lives to the Ashfall Line, because that is every person I have ever met. But I have never, in 50 years, met one of the 9. Her old voice did not tremble. It was too old for trembling, but something moved behind it, vast and slow, like the turning of the great dead hull. Is it true? Is that one of the 9, crouched on my dock, teaching a rescued child to be brave for a freight pilot's wage? Velas looked at the old woman, and then at Jace, and she made the choice she had made on the flight deck, the choice she would keep making, the truest form of seeing him she had found. She gave him the door. He's my pilot, Velas said quietly. His name is Coburn, and he'd tell you himself if you asked him that he's a freight pilot who got out and no more than that. Whatever else he is, I think, harbor master, that the kindest thing this whole world could do for one of the 9, if that's what he is to let him deliver a cargo and go home without a single candle lit in his direction. He spent 30 years running from the candles. I won't help you catch him with one, not even a grateful one. Sullivan was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, the old harbor master smiled, and it was a smile with 300 years behind it. She said, like someone who has finally understood what he is. Very well, Captain. No candles, no fuss, no parade. She looked one last time at the human on the dock and brought her own old hand up to her brow briefly, privately, a salute meant for no one to see but herself and the ghosts of a road, and lowered it. But you'll not stop me from settling the account my own way, which is a harbor master's way, and quiet, and no candles in it. Come to my office when your cargo's clear. There are things the Kell Trust would like to say to House Core, material things. The kind a struggling house can put in a ledger. Her smile deepened. You came a day late, Captain Core, carrying 31 people you were never paid to carry, and you saved our season anyway. The Kell remember the line. We know how to remember the ones who keep a road open at a cost to themselves. You'll find we're generous rememberers. It's rather the whole of who we are. The Kell Trust settled the account over 2 days, and when it was done, House Core was not sinking anymore. Velas sat across a broad desk from Sullivan and 3 trust factors, and did not, at first, understand what they were offering her, because it was too large to fit in the shape of her expectations. She had come for a fee that would clear her debt. She had, in her deepest private hope, imagined the Kell might round the fee up out of gratitude, might forgive the day's delay, might cover the fuel. What they offered her instead was a future. A standing contract. The outer Kell worlds had crops to rebuild and clinics to restock and a whole recovery ahead of them, and every gram of it had to come the long way round the border tax or the short way through a reach no one would fly, no one, that is, but the one house that had now proven it could. They wanted the Meridian on a permanent relief run. They wanted House Core, small and honest and captained by a young woman who had turned off her schedule to answer a beacon, as the Trust's own carrier, on terms that made Velas read the figures 3 times before she believed them. Not a fee. A partnership. Years of it. Enough to refit the Meridian, enough to buy a second hull, enough to lift House Core out of the red her father had left it in and into a black it had not seen in her lifetime. Why, Velas said when she could speak. The run's still deadly. Even the way we did it, it's still the reach. Any run could be the last one. Because you did the way you did it, Sullivan said. You didn't fly the deep, Captain. Your pilot did, but a pilot's a pilot, and pilots move on, and we're not fools enough to hang a world's recovery on one man's willingness to stay. What we're hanging it on is you. On a captain who, when a beacon squawked in a graveyard, turned off her fee to answer it. That's rarer than a pilot who can fly a graveyard, and it's worth more, and it does not come up for hire in any hall on any drift. We've been looking for a carrier we could trust with the lives of a recovering world for a year. We found one that came a day late because it stopped to save 31 strangers. The old harbor master folded her hands. The Kell survived the long burn because strangers spent themselves on us for free. We have 300 years of practice recognizing that particular kind of person, Captain Core. You're one of them. So is your pilot. We'd be poor rememberers of the line if we let a house like yours sink for want of a contract, when the whole point of the road the line held was that houses like yours should get to live. Velas Core signed the contract with a steady hand and walked back to her ship a different woman than the one who had signed the last one, and she found her pilot in the cargo throat, alone, in the swept-empty hold where 36 people had been cold and warm together, coiling a line, putting the ship back to rights, being no one, the way he liked. We're saved, she told him. The house. The Kell gave us a standing contract. The relief run permanent on terms that Coburn were not sinking, were the opposite of sinking. My father's debt is gone, and there's enough to refit the Meridian and buy a second hull, and I never have to sign another run I hate to keep the lights on again. She heard her own voice crack and did not care. You did that. You flew us through the thing that couldn't be flown through, and it turned out to be the exact thing that saved my whole house. You did that. You did that, Jay said, coiling the line. You answered the beacon, I just flew the ship. Stop. She said it more sharply than she meant. He looked up. Stop giving it away. You've done it the whole voyage. It wasn't me, it was the crew, it wasn't the 9, it was the 40,000. I've watched you hand every good thing you do to somebody else so fast it never has a chance to stick to you. And I understand why. I do. 30 years of people trying to pin a legend on you. Of course you learned to hand it off before it lands. She came closer into the swept hold and stood in front of him the way the child Isu had, so he could not look past her. But I'm not trying to pin a legend on you, Coburn. I'm trying to say thank you to a man. There's a difference, and I think you've forgotten there's a difference, and I'd like you to hear this one land just once. You, Jace Coburn, freight pilot. You flew my ship into the deep, and you brought 31 strangers and my whole house out of the dark, and you did it slow and careful and kind, and I saw you do it, and I'm not going to let you hand it off. It was you. Let it stick. Just once. Jace Coburn stood in the swept hold with the coiled line in his hands, and for a long moment he did the thing he did with hard fear and hard grace, held still under it, took it one careful meter at a time. And then, slowly, something in the young old face let it land. Let it stick. And Velas watched a man who had spent 30 years being no one allow himself, for the length of one breath in an empty hold at the end of a road, to be someone who had done a good thing and could hold it. All right, he said quietly. Thank you, Captain, it was me. A pause and the ghost of the smile that never quite came. And the crew and the 40,000, but me too. All right, it sticks. Good, Velas said, and found her eyes were wet and let them be. Because I have a thing to offer you and I need you to actually hear it and not hand it off before it lands. She took a breath. The Kell offered House Core a partnership. I'm offering you one, not a berth, a share. Half the house or a third, whatever's fair, whatever a man wants who flew us out of a grave. I'm going to buy a second hull and I'll need a name on it that the Kell trust, that anybody, that the whole galaxy would put their lives behind, and there is no name in the settled worlds that means what yours means, whether you want it to or not. Come in with me. Be more than a hired stick. Be a partner. Put the Cinderguard mark on the side of a ship and let it mean something good for once, instead of something you have to keep covered. Build something, Coburn. You've spent 30 years surviving. Come build something with me instead. And Jace Coburn looked at her for a long, long moment, and Valus saw the offer land, saw it reach the shut place in him, saw how much of him wanted it, and saw, too, the thing in him that had learned at a gate, a truth about himself that no contract could argue with. "No," he said gently. He set the coiled line down on the deck, careful, the way he set down everything, and he looked at her. And when he spoke it was the most Valus had ever heard him say at once, and the quietest. "I'm going to tell you why," he said. "Because you've earned the why, and because if I just say no you'll spend a year thinking you offered wrong and you didn't. You offered exactly right. That's the trouble with it." He leaned back against the swept bulkhead in the corner facing the door, the old habit, and for once he seemed to know he was doing it and let himself. "You want to put my name on a ship. You want the mark to mean something good. And I understand it, and it comes from a kind place in you, and it would work. That's the thing, Captain, it would work. Put the Cinderguard mark on a hull and the whole galaxy would line up to trust it. The Kell would. The trusts would. Everybody would. My name would build you something huge." He shook his head slowly. "And the moment it did, I'd stop being a man and start being the mark again. Every run, I'd be one of the 9. Every stranger who came aboard would come aboard to meet a legend, not to be flown somewhere by a pilot. And the thing I did, the pilgrims, the beacon, the slow, careful, ordinary thing, it only works because I'm nobody when I do it. A legend can't answer a beacon in the dark and just quietly get people out. A legend draws a crowd. A legend gets a parade. A legend can't crouch on a dock and teach a scared child to move her near hand without it being a whole ceremony. The only reason I've been any use to anyone for 30 years is that I've been no one. The day I let you make my name mean something, I stopped being able to do the only thing I'm still good for." He met her eyes. "I spent 40,000 people's worth of luck getting off that line, Captain. I've spent 30 years trying to be worth a fraction of it in the only way that's left to me, which is small and quiet and one stranger at a time. I'm not going to trade that for a name on a hull, not even yours, not even for you. The name on the hull should be core. It's the right name. It means a captain who answers beacons. Let it mean that. That's worth more than mine." Valus Core stood in the swept hold and understood, finally and completely. The man she had hired for 900 marks, and understood that he had just refused her the way he refused everything. Gently, wholly, without a crack she could work at, and that he was right, and that it broke her heart a little, and that she loved him for it, not the way a woman loves a man, but the way a person loves the proof that the good thing they believed in is real. "Then what will you take?" she said. "Because I'm not letting you walk off this ship at the Kell and vanish back into a hiring hall so some other captain can rent the Ashfall Line for the price of the fuel and never know it. I won't. I've seen you now. I can't unsee you. So tell me what you'll take, Coburn, because you're going to take something, if I have to make it as small as you need it to be." And Jace Coburn looked at her, and the smile that had never quite come, came small and tired and real. The first full smile she had seen on him in the whole long voyage. "I'll take the seat," he said. "That's all. Keep me on as your pilot, not a partner, not a name on the hull, not one of the 9. Just Coburn, your pilot, 900 marks in the mess bunk, the same as the day you hired me. Let me fly your relief run through the deep, slow and cold and careful, and pull the next beacon and the one after that out of the dark, quiet for a wage, the way it should be done. That's the offer I'll take. The small one. The one where I stay no one and just do the work." He paused. "I've been alone 30 years, Captain, because I thought being no one meant being alone. Turns out it doesn't. Turns out you can be no one on a good ship with a good crew and an old engineer who lost a brother on your line and a boy who thinks you're a wonder and a child 3 worlds away who knows how to be brave because you taught her. Turns out you can be nobody and still belong somewhere. I didn't know that. I know it now. You taught me that, and you didn't even know you were doing it the same way I taught the child." He picked the coiled line back up because his hands needed something the way they always did. "So, keep the seat warm for me, Captain Core. I'd like to stay, as your pilot. If you'll have me." "I'll have you," Valus said, around the thing in her throat. 900 marks in the mess bunk in the seat for as long as you want it, and a hot cup when you don't sleep. That last part's the only luxury I'll take, Jace said, and almost laughed, and it was, Vaylis thought, the best sound she had heard in the whole voyage. Better than the child's laugh through the deck plates. Better than the 3 taps answering through the hull. The sound of a man who had spent 30 years being no one, remembering, in a swept hold at the end of a road his own kind had held open, how to belong to something. The pilgrims left on the 3rd day, into their new world, and the goodbye took the whole morning because 31 people do not leave the crew who pulled them out of a grave quickly, nor should they. Orit Saul came to Jace last. The old shrine keeper did not name him, did not light a candle, did not make a ceremony because he had listened, that night in the cold hold, and he had understood. He simply took the human's hand in both of his, the way he'd taken it on the line, and he held it and he said, "I'll do what you asked. I'll plant my season and raise my children safe on your road and pull the next stranger out of the next dark and not make a legend of it. That's the monument I'll keep for the line. That's the one you asked for." He pressed something small into Jace's palm and closed the fingers over it. "But I'm an old shrine keeper and I'm allowed one weakness, and this is it. Not a candle, a seed. From the relief stock you carried. Plant it somewhere on some world someday when you've finally stopped moving. And let one green thing grow because 40,000 people stood at a gate. That's not a legend. That's just a garden. Even one of the 9 is allowed a garden." And Jace Coburn, who did not take things, looked at the seed in his palm and closed his hand around it and took it. "I'll plant it," he said, "when I stop moving, someday." "Someday," the old shrine keeper agreed and smiled, and went down the ramp into his new world, the last of the 200 alive. The girl Isu did not say goodbye at all. She refused. She stood at the bottom of the ramp with her small, fierce face set and her arms crossed and would not come up and would not let anyone carry her off until Jace came down to her and crouched and waited because he knew how to wait. "You're leaving," she accused him. "You're leaving," he corrected gently. "This is your world now. There's a whole sky here with a real sun in it. You've been in the cold long enough. It's time to be warm." "You taught me the slow thing," she said, and now her fierce face was cracking the way a child's does. "You're supposed to stay and teach me the rest of it." "I taught you the whole of it," Jace said. "There isn't any more. Move your near hand, rest, move your far hand. That's all there ever is, the whole way across, the whole way through everything. You know it now. You know it better than most grown people ever will." He put his blunt finger under her small chin and lifted it so she'd look at him. "You don't need me to be brave, Isu. You were brave on the line with a god over your head when you were more scared than you've ever been. You did the slow thing scared. That's the bravest thing there is, and you already did it. You'll do it your whole life now, every time it's dark, and every time you do it, that's me still teaching you, and that's you teaching whoever's watching you. That's how it works. That's how the road stays open. Somebody teaches somebody to be slow in the dark, and then they teach somebody else forever." He stood. "Go be warm, brave girl. Move your near hand. I've got all the time there is, and so do you." And the girl Isu looked up at the last surviving pilot of the Ashfall Line and wiped her face, and moved her near hand deliberately and rested, and moved her far hand, and turned, slow, brave, and walked up the ramp into her warm new world without looking back, which was, Vaylis thought, watching from the rail with her own face wet, exactly the goodbye he had taught her to give. The core Meridian left the outer Kel worlds a week later, refitted, refueled, her recyclers new and her frost gone from every porthole, bound back toward the Thren Reach with an empty hold and a full crew and a standing contract in the captain's coat, and the going out was nothing at all like the coming in. Vaylis stood on the flight deck as the Kel fell away behind them and watched her pilot bring the ship up onto her line, slow, careful, unhurried, and thought about how much had changed in the seat and how little had changed in the man. He still ate standing in his corner, facing the door. He still slept in 10-minute pieces with one part of his mind left burning like a lamp in an empty house. He still said almost nothing, and drank cold tea from a dented cup, and fixed things without being asked, and folded his hands in his lap between corrections like a man on a bench waiting for a bus in no hurry at all. He was still to any stranger who walked onto the flight deck exactly what she had taken him for on the first day. A quiet man, a licensed stick, a body in the seat cheap, no trouble. The difference was that she saw him now, and so did the crew, and that turned out to be the whole of what he had needed, and the whole of what he had refused to be given for 30 years, and the reason he could finally, at last, sit still under it. Tava's dower came up the ladder in the second hour with 2 cups of tea, hot, and set one down beside the human seat without a word, and Jace picked it up and wrapped both hands around it, and the old engineer settled into the right seat with his own cup and looked out at the stars for a while. "You know," Dower said eventually, "I spent 30 years wanting to ask one of the 9 a question, and I got to ask it, and you gave me an answer that let me put my brother down, finally, after 30 years of carrying him. I've been trying to think how to thank you for that, and I can't find the size of the thing. It's too big for thank you." "Then don't thank me," Jace said. "Your brother put down 11 billion people's worth of running time so people like your captain's family could get down the road. I told you the truth about him because it was the truth, not to be thanked for it. He was worth thanking. I was just there to say so." He drank his tea. "Light your candle for him this turn same as always, Dower, but light it lighter. He'd want you carrying him lighter. That's the last thing I'll say about the line. And then I'd like to go back to being your captain's pilot and nothing else, if that's all right with you." "That's all right with me," the old engineer said, and there was peace in it, a 30-year wait set down at last. "Coburn, one more thing and then I'll leave it forever." He turned. "When your captain hired you off that haul for 900 marks, did you know what the run was? Did you know she was going to take you into the reach, into the deep, into the exact kind of grave you spent 30 years walking away from?" Jace was quiet for a moment. "I knew the route," he said. "I saw the routing before I signed. I knew where she was going." "And you signed anyway, for 900 marks. Talked her down 100 even." Dower shook his head slowly. "Why, of all the runs in that haul, why take the one that ran you straight back into the thing you'd spent your life running from?" And Jace Coburn looked out at the stars, at the far faint smudge of the Thren Reach ahead, the graveyard he was flying back toward with an empty hold and a full crew, and he was quiet for a long time, and when he answered it was so quiet that Velas, behind them, had to lean in to hear it. "Because I was tired of running from it," he said. 30 years I hauled grain on the safe lanes and told myself the war was behind me. It isn't. It's never behind you. It's just a graveyard you're pretending not to fly past." And then a young captain who just buried her father put a run on the board that went straight into the deep of it, and nobody else in the hall would touch it, and I thought, he stopped, turned the dented cup in his hands. "I thought, there's people who'll die at the far end of that run if nobody flies it. The kell, the season, all of it. And there's a captain young enough to be my daughter about to fly into a grave alone because she's out of options and too stubborn to lose her house. And I've spent 30 years being no one on the safe lanes, when the only thing I was ever actually good for was flying people through the deep and out the other side. And I thought, maybe that's the seed the old man means. Maybe you don't get to stop moving and plant a garden until you've flown the grave one more time on purpose, with your eyes open, for someone worth doing it for, instead of just running from it for the rest of your life." He drank the last of the tea. "So I signed, for 900 marks, because your captain was worth flying the grave for, and I was tired of pretending I wasn't the man who could do it. That's the whole answer, Dower. I signed on to go home, the long way, through the middle of it. And it turned out home was on the ship the whole time." The flight deck was quiet. Behind the 2 seats, Velas Kaur stood with her hand over her mouth and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not have been smaller than the silence. Dower rose, after a while, and took the empty cups, and put his old hand once, briefly, on the young pilot's shoulder, the closest thing to a salute the man would allow, and went back down the ladder to his reactor, carrying a brother 30 years lighter than he'd carried him up. And Valus came and sat in the right seat, in the warm quiet, as the ship ran on toward the Reach. "For the record," she said, "you're not 900 marks and a mess bunk anymore. The Kell contract changed the numbers. You're getting a real wage now whether you argue about it or not, and a real cabin, and the mess bunk goes to the next stray I hire out of a hall." "You can pay me what you like," Jace said. "I'll still fly the same." "I know you will, that's the point. That's why you get the wage." She looked at him, at the plain young face and the old weather eyes, at the man she had underestimated so completely and would never underestimate again. "Can I ask you something? The thing I've wanted to ask since Corbin Drift, since the clamp." "Ask it." "When you sat there and eased the burn instead of cutting it, when the whole ship was screaming and my 4 people were panicking into their collars, how were you so calm? I thought it was that you didn't care. I thought I'd hired a dull man. I know better now. So how? How are you always the calmest person in the room, every time, no matter what's coming through the hull?" And Jace Coburn thought about it, seriously, the way he thought about everything. And then he told her the truth, which was the last thing he taught her, and the first thing and the only thing. "Because I already died once," he said quietly, without drama, a plain man stating a plain fact. "At the gate. On the 19th day when the fire took everyone I loved and the line held and I didn't understand why I was still breathing. Part of me stayed there. Part of me is still on that line and always will be, and that part isn't afraid of anything anymore because the worst thing already happened to it a long time ago." He set the dented cup down. "So when the clamp screams or the reavers come, or a god wakes up 800 meters off the flank, I'm not calm because I'm brave, Captain. I'm calm because I'm already home free. Everything after the gate is extra. Every clamp I unfreeze, every stranger I pull out of a grave, every cup of hot tea an off-duty captain hands me when I haven't slept, it's all extra. It's all more than I was ever supposed to get. And a man who knows everything he has is extra doesn't panic when the hull screams. He just does the next slow, careful thing and is grateful he's still here to do it." He looked at her, and the small, tired, real smile came again. "That's not a war story. That's just how you fly a graveyard. Slow and careful and grateful and never ever afraid because the worst is behind you and everything ahead is a gift. I learned it in the worst place there is, but it works everywhere. It'll work on your relief run. It'd work on a grain hauler. It'll work on you, Captain, the next time your hull screams and your people panic. Be already home free. Do the next slow thing. That's the whole of it." "That's all I know." Valus Core sat in the right seat of her father's ship, saved from the red, bound back into the deep with the last of the Ashfall Line flying her home, and understood that she had gone looking for a cheap pilot to survive one run, and had found instead the one thing her whole family and 11 billion strangers had been kept alive 300 years to have the chance to find. A person worth learning from, doing a plain thing plainly, asking for nothing, seen at last. "Do the next slow thing," she said, trying it out, tasting it. "Do the next slow thing," Jace Coburn agreed, and turned the Meridian's nose toward the graveyard, toward the next beacon and the one after that, toward the long, careful work of pulling strangers out of the dark for a wage, one hand and then the other, all the time there is. And the old freighter ran on toward the Reach, warm now and full and unafraid, carrying a captain who had finally learned to see, and a pilot who had finally let himself be seen, and a seed in a dead man's tin waiting for the day the work was done, and it was, at last, time to stop moving and plant a garden. But that day was not this day. This day there was a run to fly, and a road to keep open, and a hull that might scream at any hour with someone's whole life inside it. So Jace Coburn folded his hands in his lap, and watched the graveyard come up slow and cold and patient ahead of the bow, and did the next slow, careful thing and was grateful, and was not afraid.